Whispers of the Amber Veil. A Tale of Lost Memories, Forbidden Love, and the Magic Hidden Beneath the Sea Breeze. By Jasmine Taylor. Copyright 2025 Jasmine Taylor. All rights reserved. Prologue. The sea had always whispered to her, even when she was far away. In Paris, the murmur of the Seine could never drown out the voice of Lyra, that forgotten island of her childhood, where salt and secrets clung to the air like ghosts. Clara Moreau had not set foot on that shore for 14 years. Yet that night, as the ferry carved through the dark water, she could almost see the old villa rising from the cliffs. Villa Ambra, her aunt's house, half devoured by vines and memory. It waited for her like an unfinished sentence. She pressed her hand to the glass. The moonlight turned the sea into a sheet of molten amber. Something beneath its surface shimmered, fleeting, impossible, a glow that pulsed once and disappeared. Perhaps a trick of her exhausted mind. Perhaps not. They said her aunt had died suddenly, leaving everything to Clara. But the letter, written in her aunt's careful, slanted hand, told another story. There are things in a house that must never be restored. The veil must remain sealed. Clara had read those words 100 times, yet their meaning slipped through her fingers like sand. What veil? And why? Even now, did the sound of the waves seem to breathe her name? When the ferry docked, the wind carried the scent of the island, lemons, seaweed, and the faint sweetness of oleander. The same wind that had once lifted her laughter across the cliffs. The same that now whispered, low and urgent, as if warning her, "You should never have come back." Chapter 1. The House by the Cliffs. The road that led to Villa Ambra wound upward in a single line of cracked stone and silence. The taxi had left her at the old gate, refusing to drive farther once the tires met the uneven dirt path. The driver, a man with sunburned cheeks, had crossed himself before turning back toward the harbor. Now, Clara stood alone before the wrought iron gate, its bars rusted and half hidden by wild jasmine. The hinges groaned as she pushed it open. Somewhere in the garden, cicadas sang their endless hymn, and from the cliffs below came the deep heartbeat of the sea. The house waited. Villa Ambra was both grand and wounded, its ochre walls peeling, its windows clouded by years of neglect. Once, she had run barefoot through its corridors. Now her footsteps echoed like those of a stranger trespassing in her own memories. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the faint scent of amber oil. The tall windows filtered the afternoon light into veins of gold, painting the cracked marble floors. Every room she entered seemed to hold its breath. On the mantelpiece, a clock had stopped at 3:12. A spider had made a cathedral between its hands. She opened the shutters of the main hall. The sea burst in sound, salt, and brightness. For a moment, the sight almost broke her. The endless blue horizon, the same she had watched as a child beside her aunt. But the illusion of warmth vanished when she noticed a shadow moving beyond the garden wall. Someone was watching her. Her pulse quickened. She stepped closer to the window, but the figure was gone. Only the whisper of the wind remained. "Just the gardener," she murmured to herself, though she knew there hadn't been one for years. The study was just as she remembered. Shelves bent under the weight of books about mythology, restoration, and forbidden arts of pigment and light. In the corner stood her aunt's easel, covered by a linen cloth. Clara hesitated, then lifted it. A half-finished painting stared back at her, a woman veiled in translucent amber. Her face turned away, her hand outstretched towards something unseen. The brushstrokes shimmered faintly under the dust, as if painted with living gold. Beneath the canvas, in her aunt's looping script, were 3 words: "Do not touch." Clara felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She traced the edge of the canvas, but stopped short of the veil of paint. The air around it seemed to hum, faintly vibrating like the moment before a string snaps on a violin. A sudden sound broke the spell, the slam of a door downstairs. She froze. "Hello," she called, voice trembling. No answer. The silence that followed was too precise, too intentional. She descended the staircase, each step releasing a puff of dust. The front door was closed, locked from the inside. Only the wind could have done it, she told herself. But then she saw it, a footprint near the threshold. Fresh, bare, at dusk. She lit a single lamp in the kitchen and opened a tin of coffee she'd found in the cupboard. Its bitter scent filled the room, anchoring her to the present. On the table lay her aunt's letter, the one that had summoned her back. She unfolded it again, tracing the final line. You will hear them when the veil begins to breathe. Outside, the wind rose. The shutters trembled, and from the cliffs came a long, low sigh that could have been the sea, or a voice carried through time. Clara closed her eyes, pressing her hands over her ears. But even then, she could still hear it, soft and distant, whispering her name beneath the storm. Clara, come back to us. Chapter 2. The night the veil breathed. Night arrived with suddenness that felt personal, as if the island had chosen to extinguish the day rather than let it fade. From the kitchen window, Clara watched the horizon fold into ink. The lamp on the table cast a small, patient circle of light over her aunt's letter, the old keys, and a coil of string she'd taken from a drawer without knowing why. She boiled water in a dented kettle, letting the hiss settle her nerves. The house responded with a slow ticking. Pipes, timbers, hidden things remembering how to be a home. Above her, the corridors rested. Below, the sea rehearsed its endless line. You will hear them when the veil begins to breathe. She repeated the sentence out loud, testing the weight of it. Veil. She could imagine a metaphor, a poet's way of naming grief, or the curtain of years between what she was and what she had been. But breathing? That word felt like a finger tapping on a locked door. She carried her cup into the main hall and switched on a second lamp. The yellow pool of light spilled over the stair rail, catching specks of dust that turned like constellations. The footprint near the front door was still there, pale, clean, unmistakable. She knelt and touched its fading edge. Warmth lingered. A trick of the mind, she told herself. Skin memory. At the back of the hall, a narrow passage led toward the old service rooms. She hadn't walked it in years. The air was cooler there, edged with the smell of damp stone. She found the breaker box and flipped a few switches. Somewhere, a distant bulb surrendered a small glow, and the passage unrolled into a shallow set of steps. Clara descended, counting them. The numbers loosened her breath, gave her something to hold. At the bottom, a door stood half open. It led to the conservatory, a glass spine attached to the house, once filled with citrus trees and winter roses. As a child, she had stolen oranges from the potted trees, certain they were sweeter than any other fruit. Now the glass was filmed with salt and years, and the floor was furrowed with fallen leaves and soil. A few stubborn plants clung to life, a lemon sapling with a single green fruit, a vine of jasmine that threaded itself through a broken pane toward night. Clara wiped a circle on the glass with the cuff of her sweater. The garden beyond lay in a tangle of moon-silvered shapes. The old stone path cut through rosemary bushes and agaves before entering the overlook where the cliff dropped away to the sea. A wind moved through the plants and whispered across the glass, almost human in its cadence. She should have gone back to the kitchen, to the small lamp and the kettle, and the familiar ritual of making a bed on the sofa with sheets that still smelled faintly of her aunt's soap. Instead, she unlatched the conservatory door and stepped outside. The night air wrapped around her. It held the island's inventory. Brine, fennel, crushed thyme underfoot, metal from the railings that bordered the cliff. Her shoes sank slightly into the damp soil. On the path, shadows of the wrought iron arbor striped her like cage bars when the wind moved the vine. She passed a terracotta pot split by a root, remembering how her aunt had scolded her for overwatering the citrus. You must learn to listen to thirst, not drown it, her aunt had said. It had sounded like advice about more than plants. At the overlook, the sea stood shoulder to shoulder with the sky. The cliff was not sheer. It fell in terraces of rock and scrub. Out on the water, a pinprick of light swept a slow arc, a lighthouse somewhere beyond the northern headland. The beam washed the surface, then swung away, again and again, steady as a heartbeat. Clara leaned on the cool iron rail. The wind came from the east, a steady breath. She closed her eyes. The voices, if they were voices, would be the wind. She knew that, But when she opened her eyes, something moved at the edge of sight, a glimmer just under the surface of the water, like the fugitive glow she had seen from a ferry. It pulsed once, paused, and pulsed again, in rhythm with the sweep of the distant light. She felt the answer before she thought it. Not a lighthouse, the sea itself, or something beneath its skin. A sound reached her, footsteps on gravel, soft barefoot. Her chest tightened. She turned quickly, but the path behind her was empty. Wind had a talent for impersonation. She forced a laugh she didn't feel and started back toward the house. Halfway to the conservatory, she stopped. On the path, a lemon, perfectly round, fresh fallen from a tree that no longer bore fruit. Its skin shone like a small moon. She bent, picked it up, and the aroma release was sharp and clean, so present that tears stung her eyes. She pressed the lemon to her face and breathed. When she lowered it, her hands were sticky with oil. A thin line of juice ran across her palm, glinting in the moonlight. You used to make candy with those. The voice came from the dark along the garden wall. Male low, carrying the soft grain of the island's accent. Clara's spine went rigid. She turned slowly. A man stepped forward into the reach of the conservatory light. He was perhaps mid-30s, lean, wind-browned, a day's stubble like smoke on his jaw. His clothes were simple. White shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, black trousers that looked too fine to be work pants, yet were scuffed at the knees. He wasn't barefoot. On his feet, worn espadrilles whispered against the stone. I knocked. He lifted his hands, palms out, as if announcing gentleness. I'm sorry if I frightened you. Clara found her voice thinner than she liked. You should have kept knocking. I did. The house doesn't like strangers. A smile ghosted across his face. It never has. Who are you? Luca Vitali. He nodded toward the cliffs. I work at the marine station by the cove. We monitor currents, light pollution, things that pretend to be stars. He glanced toward the sea. I saw you arrive. The island notices when someone returns. Clara set the lemon on the conservatory step, unwilling to carry it inside for reasons she couldn't name. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Villa Ambra tells everyone. He said it easily, as islanders said the most impossible things, with empirical certainty. I knew your aunt. Clara's breath thinned. She could see her aunt's hands, stained with pigment, undoing her scarf, untangling Clara's hair after the wind had braided it into knots. She died. Luca dipped his head. I'm sorry. After a moment, she asked me, last winter, to check the garden when storms came. The high tides take liberties. I built a small barrier near the lower terrace. He gestured toward the shadows. You won't see it in daylight. Clara considered the footprint near the door, the slam, the glimmer. Did you come earlier today? No. You're sure? Quite. Her skin prickled, a small flock of nerves. She nodded toward the conservatory. Do you want to come in? He shook his head. Storm tonight. You should close the shutters. The east windows. The wind will try to make your house into a ship. She almost smiled despite herself. Thank you. He stepped back, the dark catching his edges. If you need help, the marine station is open late. The road along the cove. He pointed into the night, as if she could see the way by compass alone. We keep odd hours. Good night, Mr. Vitali. Luca, he corrected, already turning. Good night, Ms. Moreau. He moved away without sound, as if the path remembered him and held the stone steady. When the garden wall had taken him, Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. The night reassembled itself around her. The wind, the low hoarse plea of a gull, the faint, intermittent pulse on the water. Inside, she locked the conservatory door and drew the bolt, then went room to room and closed the shutters. The house felt steadier with the wooden lids lowered, like a face that had finally chosen its expression. She made a bed on the sofa with an old coverlet and a faded sheet, fetched her suitcase from the hall, and emptied it slowly. A sweater, a tin of pigments and small brushes, the traveling kit she used to assess frescoes before a commission, her notebook. She sat at the table with the notebook open and wrote down the facts. As if a list could ground her. Arrived at dusk. Footprint near front door. Bare. No one inside. Conservatory open. Garden alive in parts. Lemon tree produced fruit. Luca Vitali Marine Station. Said he knew ant. Warned a storm. Glimmer on water. Twice synchronized with distant light. Feeling of house listening. She closed a notebook, slid it under the edge of the lamp, and turned off the kitchen light. The hall lamp she left on, for the way it balanced the space. On the sofa, she lay on her side and drew the sheet to her chin. Sleep came like a tide that meant her no harm. At first, she floated on an easy surface. The house exhaled and inhaled in quiet metronome. Somewhere a shutter tapped a loose rhythm. She counted between taps and found a pattern. 3, 1, 2, 3, until the numbers turned to the shape of the frozen clock's hands. 3:12. She smiled at the small absurdity and slid deeper. The dream began with water. She stood in it, warm as blood, the surface unbroken, except where her knees blurred it into rings. The color wasn't blue or green, but luminous amber, and when she cupped her hands, the water thickened, as if it remembered resin. Beneath, something moved. Not fish, not current, the sense of a body as large as a house, turning slowly, too slowly, as if deciding whether to surface. "Clara," said a voice, and the water clarified into light. "Clara, do you remember?" She tried to answer, but her mouth filled with the taste of citrus and salt. Her aunt's hands, stained with gold pigment, open like a book. "Not yet," her aunt said. "You haven't learned the rules of breath." In the dream, the villa's walls were transparent. The painting in the study, the veiled woman, turned her face toward Clara for the first time. Her eyes were sea-colored and rimmed in light. She raised her right hand, the palm marked with a thin line of amber, like sap caught in skin. Through the veil, she spoke a word that sounded like home and hunger at once. The water rose to Clara's throat. Panic broke the surface of her chest. She reached out to the woman in the painting, but the veil thickened, and behind it something inhaled. Not air, but memory. The room bowed inward, ribs and honeycomb together, and from the sea below came the long intake of a creature waking. Clara woke with a cry trapped in her lungs. The house had shifted, not in place, but in attention. The hall lamp was still on, a quiet hemisphere of safety. But the air in the room had cooled, and the smell of salt was sharper, as if the sea had climbed the cliff in the night. Outside, wind flogged the shutters in earnest. Rain had begun. She swung her legs to the floor. Her feet met cold tile. The kettle rattled on its base, gently, as if someone had set it back too hard after pouring tea. The clock on the mantel still read 3:12. "Enough," she said, out loud to no one. Her voice returned quickly, proof of solid walls. She went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, lit the stove. The gas caught with a tidy bloom. The ordinary miracle of flame calmed her, steadied her hands. When the water boiled, she poured it over a tea bag and stood with her palms against the counter's worn wood until the trembling left her arms. Steam rose around her face. She drank. The black tea moved through her like a small march. Only then did she hear it. A whisper, so slight she thought it was steam. Not words at first, but the shape of words. A rhythm she recognized from the dream. She turned off the stove. The whisper persisted. It came from the study. She stood in the doorway, tea in hand, not wanting to cross into the room. Heavier darkness held there, pooled in the corners and under the desk. But the source of the sound was unmistakable. The easel, the half-finished painting, the veiled woman. Clara set the mug on the desk with a soft ceramic chirp and took one step forward, then another. Her breath shortened, not with fear, but with the obedience the body shows to childhood habits. The way, in this room, she had always lowered her voice because her aunt had told her sacred things were loud only in their own company. Up close, the paint looked fresh. She understood that it wasn't. It was merely the way the pigment had been bound, the old recipe that kept it alive. But a bead of something bright slid from the veil's lower edge, slow as a tear. It hung, trembled, and fell. Clara caught it without thinking. The drop landed on the pad of her finger and cooled. She lifted it closer. It smelled of orange blossom and pine, sharp and sweet, and when she pressed her thumb to it, it stretched in a fine, elastic line before breaking. Resin, then, amber in its beginning. Her aunt's voice returned, not in memory, but in her ear, the way voices do when a house has kept them. There are things that must never be restored. Clara, some fractures are doors. Behind the cloth of paint, the woman's veiled face only seemed to breathe. In, out. The whisper threaded the space again, clearer now, syllables shaping themselves around a name that might have been Clara's or might have been the island itself. A gust struck the east windows. The whole house shuddered. In the split second after the impact, the whisper sharpened into a single word. Listen! The study door slammed behind her. Clara spun. The latch had slipped. That was all. She told herself that. But in the echo of the door, wood on wood, the surprising drum of it, another sound rose from somewhere beneath the floorboards. A hollow knocking, far below, as if someone were moving along a corridor just under her feet. The villa had catacombs. Not real ones, but cellars and storage tunnels at the cliff's edge, dug in the days when the house had been a monastery, and then a way station for traders hiding goods from a tax collector's eyes. She knew the stories. Still, her heart did something sharp and unpleasant in her chest. She pressed her palm against the nearest wall. Cold stone, a seam in the plaster you'd miss without a light. She blew out a breath. Enough, she said again, because naming limits is a kind of magic, and she needed one that belonged to her. The knocking stopped. The whisper softened. In the painting, the veil lay still. She opened the study door and left it open. In the hall, the lamp hummed. She retrieved her mug from the desk, now rimmed with a crescent of tea, and sipped. The heat moved her back toward herself. When she turned, she saw the narrow staircase near the servants' passage, the one that led down to the lower rooms, to storage, to the old stone that kept the house's spine. She should wait for daylight. She knew this. Any restorer would tell a client to wait for better conditions, better light, an extra pair of hands. She put the mug on the hall table, took the lamp, and went to the stairs. Each step found its echo. Not loud, not theatrical. Honest wood, the air cooled by degrees. At the bottom, the corridor ran east-west. To the left, a cellar door, barred and swollen with age. To the right, the old pantry, the wine rack empty as ribs. She turned left. The barred door protested, then relented. Behind it, a narrow chamber with a low ceiling open, lined in rough stone. The smell was older there, not rot, not mold, something mineral and clean, the odor of a dry cave. On the far wall, a circle had been cut centuries ago and then bricked over. The brickwork was good, but a thin crack laddered up from the sill. She set the lamp on the floor and crouched. The crack had been filled at some point with plaster slightly lighter than the surrounding stone. Within it, something gleamed, barely perceptible. Gold? No, not cold like gold. Warm. The color of sap when the afternoon sun burns through leaves. She stood, lamp in hand, and the light caught on small figures carved into the lintel. Saints or sailors, their faces worn to suggestions. Between two of them, incised with blade, the letter B and the number 12. Clara's stomach went hollow. She had seen that marking before, not here, not even in this country. On a museum crate years ago, during an internship in Germany, a violin case cataloged as B12, anonymous provenance. She had felt a heat in her palm when she traced the letters there, a ridiculous superstition she'd laughed away. Now, the same mark watched her from the stone of her aunt's house. "What did you hide?" she whispered to the wall, to her aunt, to the sea that lived inside the stone. The lamp flickered. A draft slipped from somewhere, skimming her ankle. She straightened, and the lamp's light found, on the floor by the brick circle, the smallest of things, a scatter of lemon seeds, 3, pale and recent. One still wet. Her throat tightened. She thought of the fruit in her hand by the conservatory, of Luca's voice speaking from the dark, of the drop of resin on her finger in the study. The house had drawn a diagram in objects. She didn't know how to read it. Not yet. A low roll of thunder pressed the corridors, turning the whole villa into a drum. She lifted the lamp and backed out, closing the barred door behind her. She didn't latch it. She wasn't sure why. In the hall, she replaced the lamp on the table and carried her empty cup to the kitchen sink. She washed it dried it with a towel that had thinned to silk, and set it upside down on the rack. The geometry of simple acts steadied her. The polite angle of porcelain, the neatness of the towel's fold. When she returned to the sofa, dawn had begun the work of unspooling night. The east-facing shutters were a paler outline. The wind had shifted a key lower, an old violinist tired at last of bravado. Clara sat, folded her legs beneath her, and let her back find the shallow hollow the cushions remembered. She didn't sleep. She listened. Somewhere beneath the house, something had moved, yes, but not toward her. The veil had breathed, and nothing had broken. The first morning on Lyra would come, with its ordinary tasks. Food to find, windows to open, calls to make, the wet lemon seeds to puzzle over. She would find Luca's station. If the rain relented, she would learn which rules govern breath. When the first light came through and made a narrow blade on the floor, she stood and went to the study. The painting waited, quiet, obedient to daylight. The drop of resin on her finger had hardened to a pearl the size of a pinhead. She held it up, and the light caught it the way a childhood's secret catches between teeth. She set it carefully in the notebooks in her pocket and wrote one line across the top of a fresh page. Letters sharp, more promise than fact. I will restore what you asked me not to, but only enough to understand what you feared. The house did not answer. The sea did, in its language. A steady breath drawn in, a steady breath let go. And in that rhythm, for the first time since she had stepped off the ferry, Clara felt less alone. Chapter 3. The Morning of the Forgotten Names. The storm passed as if it had never meant harm. By morning, the air outside Villa Ambra smelled scrubbed clean, of pine resin, salt, and wet stone. The shutters rattled faintly against the walls, impatient to be opened. Clara sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of black coffee and a crust of bread. The exhaustion in her body was deep but thinly stretched, like a film over something sharper. She had slept only in fragments, 10 minutes at a time, chased by the echo of footsteps in the cellar and the breathing of the veil. Her eyes drifted to the notebook. On the page, the lines she had written before dawn still stared back at her. I will restore what you asked me not to, but only enough to understand what you feared. She closed the book and looked toward the window. Sunlight filtered through the slats in long, calm bands. Outside, the sea was a pale turquoise, whipped white at the edges where it met the rocks. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. She decided to let the house breathe again. The sound of each latch giving way was its own ceremony. One by one, she opened the shutters, kitchen, hall, study, upstairs rooms. The light chased away the dimness, but it also revealed what the dark had hidden. Dust motes like snow, spider silk stretched across corners, and the slow decay of years. When she reached the study, she hesitated. The painting stood exactly as she had left it. The woman's veiled face turned slightly toward the sea-facing window. In daylight, the colors looked more subdued, but the amber shimmer hadn't vanished. It seemed to catch the sun and feed on it. Clara approached, holding her breath. The dried resin drop she had taken the night before was now sealed in her notebook. She ran her fingers just above the surface of the painting, not touching it, tracing the curve of the veil. She had restored dozens of frescoes and paintings in her career, but none had ever made her feel like an intruder. The pigments here were strange. Old, yes, but alive, resisting the usual laws of decay. Under the faint hum of the morning wind, she heard it again, the low vibration that seemed to come not from a room, but from inside her own chest, answering the rhythm of the sea below. She stepped back quickly. "Enough for today," she whispered. In the courtyard, the storm had left the garden trembling but intact. Broken branches littered the path, and the air shimmered with the smell of lemon oil. Clara carried a basket and began clearing debris, letting the work steady her mind. She was bent over the rosemary hedge when she heard someone calling her name. The voice was male, tentative, and carried by the wind. She turned, shielding her eyes from the sun. A figure approached from the lane, tall, in a loose white shirt, boots muddy by the night's rain. Luca Vitali. "Good morning," he said, stopping just outside the gate. His smile was small, uncertain. "I came to see if the storm spared the house." "It did," she replied. "Mostly." He nodded, glancing past her at the villa's facade. It always survives. Old stones know how to bend. She noticed he carried something wrapped in cloth under his arm. What's that? He hesitated. A favor, or maybe an apology. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small wooden box, dark, smooth, and sealed with brass latch. I found this yesterday morning near the lower terrace. I thought it might have belonged to your aunt. Clara took it gently. The box was light, as if empty, though it smelled faintly of orange blossom and varnish. I haven't opened it, Lucas said. Didn't feel right. The latch resisted for a moment, then clicked open with a tired sigh. Inside, on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a paintbrush. Its handle was carved from pale olive wood, worn smooth by use. But the bristles, dark amber at the root, almost golden at the tips, didn't look like any natural fiber. They caught the light as if they were spun from resin. Clara's breath caught. This was hers. She was a painter? She called herself a restorer, but yes. She looked up. My aunt didn't believe in boundaries between what could be painted and what could be summoned. Luca tilted his head. Summoned? Clara almost laughed. Just her way of being poetic. She said that some pigments remember what they once were. Luca studied her face. Thoughtful. There's a legend about that, you know. The old Iran painters used to mix amber dust with oil. They believe it could trap a moment inside the paint, like a breath or a name. A name? He nodded. They called it El Ambrice Ascolta, the amber that listens. Said it could hold voices from the sea. Clara felt a familiar chill return to her skin. That's superstition. Of course, he said easily, though his eyes didn't entirely agree. But it makes good stories. He looked toward the cliffs. I have to go back to the station. The current sensors shorted during the storm. If you need anything, I'll be there until late afternoon. She nodded. Thank you, Luca. He smiled faintly. I'll bring you lemons next time. The ones in your garden are mostly wild now. As he left, Clara closed the gate and turned back toward the villa. The box felt heavier in her hands than it should have. In the afternoon, she worked in the study. The restoration tools were laid out neatly on the desk. Fine brushes, cotton swabs, solvent bottles, magnifying lens. She began cleaning the frame of the veiled painting, staying far from the pigment itself. At times, the faint hum returned. She tried to ignore it. At one point, the wind shifted, and a draft pushed through the corridor. The veil in the painting rippled. Not the paint, but the air around it, as though something on the other side had exhaled. Clara froze, her pulse hammering. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it, a faint reflection in the glass of a picture frame, a figure standing behind her. She turned instantly. No one, only her own shadow on the floor. But when she faced the painting again, she realized that the woman's pose had changed. The veiled head was tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward Clara. She stumbled backward, nearly upsetting a bottle of solvent. No, she whispered. That's impossible. Her phone, lying on the desk, vibrated sharply. The sudden sound made her flinch. She snatched it up, unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A moment of static, then a woman's voice, low, distant, trembling as though carried through water. Clara? Her heart stopped. The voice was unmistakable. Her aunt's. Aunt Léonie? But the line was empty. Only the sound of waves, then silence. She dropped the phone onto the desk, her breath uneven. The display showed call ended 07 seconds. Her gaze returned to the painting. The amber glow within the veil seemed stronger now, gathering light from nowhere. She forced herself to turn away, shut the study door, and walk outside into the air. At sunset, the island turned to gold. The sea blazed with copper reflections, and the villa's windows caught the fire like mirrors. Clara stood on the terrace with the brush in her hand, its amber bristles shimmering. She thought of her aunt's warnings, of Luca's quiet certainty that the island listened, and of the mark carved into the stone downstairs, B12. The letter and number stirred something half buried in her memory. A catalog code. A violin in a museum. She went back inside, took her notebook, and wrote 3 words under the morning's entry. Amber listens always. Then she added one more, hesitant but certain. B12. When she lifted her eyes, dusk had gathered in the corners of the room. And for a heartbeat, just one, she thought she saw the veiled woman's hand move, brushing the edge of the canvas as if trying to reach her. The sound that followed was soft, almost tender, a whisper rising from the walls themselves. Remember me. Chapter 4. The Map of Breath. Morning arrived with a polished clarity that felt almost contrived, as if the island wished to pretend the night had not happened. The sea lay in sheets of calm metal. Gulls wrote loose letters on the sky. Clara ate an apricot over the sink, its juice bright as sunlight in her mouth, while her mind circled the same 3 points. The brick circle in the cellar, the mark B12, and the whisper from the painting that had asked her, so gently it had hurt, to remember. By 8 she had laced her boots and tied her hair, the gesture a small treaty with order. She slipped the olive wood brush into her bag, as if it were a talisman, and set out along the lane toward the cove. The road fell in steps between stone walls dressed with lichen. A cat tracked her from one leap of light to the next, then lost interest and vanished into rosemary. The marine station looked nothing like the myths the island traded in, a squat modern building of concrete and glass. It perched above the water as if listening to it. Solar panels, a flag faded by salt, an aluminum ladder that went straight down into the cove like a single mark on a ruler. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and ozone. Computers murmured. Screens showed nothing that a poet would recognize. Sine waves like sleeping serpents. Scatterplots, a map where currents braided their long hair around the island. Lucas stood in the doorway of a lab. Sleeves rolled, a strip of gauze at his forearm where his sensor had given him an impolite hello. He smiled when he saw her. Quick, clean. Ms. Moreau, you found us. Clara, she said. I did. He ushered her in with an open hand. We're just stitching the cove back together after the storm. Want to see what it said while we were sleeping. A second person stepped out from behind a server rack. A woman around 50 with short silver hair and eyes the color of tempered glass. Her expression warmed on seeing Clara in the particular way of scientists who already approve of people who show up early. Dr. Irina Ortega, she said, offering a hand. Her accent held Spain under Italy like a continent in reserve. Welcome to our cathedral of small truths. Clara Moreau. Luca told me about your aunt. Léonie, yes? We used to trade oranges for gossip in winter. A softness touched the edges of her mouth. I'm sorry. Clara inhaled. Thank you. Luca tapped a key and one of the screens complied, lines marching into position. We log light and movement in the cove, mostly bioluminescent organisms. At night they bloom under the surface. Schools like galaxies. Last night we caught something we don't see often. The graph resolved into pulses spaced by silence, a regular interval. A second window showed video. The cove in velvet dark. Then, there, a low amber flare under the surface, not the cool blue she associated with plankton, but a warmer language. It brightened once, paused, brightened again. The hairs along Clara's arms rose. How often? She asked, throat dry. Every 84 seconds, Irina said, already scribbling on a pad, translating observation to hypothesis. For about 20 minutes around 3 in the morning. Then nothing. She looked at Clara. Does that hour mean anything to you? The frozen clock on the mantel. 3:12. The number had perched at the edge of her mind like a bird refusing to fly. 84 seconds. Did its private math. She didn't say any of that. She said, the color isn't typical. No, Luca said. Blue was a plankton story. Amber is rare. We used to think it was silk catching sodium light from the road. There's no road here. He pointed at a second spectrogram. It's not an illusion. Something under the water emits at a warmer frequency. Heat? Clara asked. Geothermal? Possible, Irina said, but unlikely. The geology disagrees. Also, the pulses are too polite. She smiled like a person greeting a good enemy. Whatever it is, it keeps time. Luca leaned his hip on the console. You could feel it from the villa last night. Some nights, I think the island breathes with it. Clara kept her gaze on the screen. so he wouldn't see the way the word breathes threaded the weak places in her. Do you know the caves along the cliff below Villa Ambra? We do, Irina said. Part of the cliff is a limestone honeycomb. In big storms, air pushes through the cavities and the sea inhales and exhales. But that's noise. This, she indicated the rhythm on the screen, this is a metronome. Luca glanced at Clara's bag. You brought something. She hesitated, then took out the brush in its wooden box and set it on the table as if placing a bone in a reliquary. Irina bent close without touching. Olive wood, hand-carved, and the bristles, curious. Not boar, not horse. Synthetic? Clara shook her head. I don't know what they are. They catch light as if they remember the sun. It sounded absurd in a room this secular. Still, no one laughed. Luca's gaze climbed from the brush to Clara's face as if a wire connected them, and any pressure in one would sing the other. Your Aunt Eustace? I think so. Then we'll have a story. Irina said simply. Objects overhear us. Pigments most of all. You must be careful which questions you ask. Clara absorbed it like advice given in another room of her life long ago. She set the brush back in its box and closed the lid. If I wanted to see the caves, she asked, could I? On foot at low tide, Luca said, but the path is jealous. By boat is kinder. He checked the tide table tacked to the wall with a pushpin shaped like a red star. We have a calm window before dusk. If you don't mind the boat lying about its age. Irina made a face at him that meant she would forgive him only if he came back alive. Wear a jacket, she told Clara, and a superstition, one you trust. They went down to the cove with life vests and a coil of rope. The skiff was indeed older than it had a right to be. Its paint a history of decisions. Lucas steadied it as Clara climbed in, then pushed off with a practiced shove that put the boat into the cove's quiet throat. The water had the color of glass bottles melted and re-poured. They moved along the cliff where the rock kept its diary in layers. Swallows stitched the air. The villa, above and just around a rocky shoulder, showed only a fragment of wall and a line of iron railing like a notation on a staff. There, Lucas said softly as if pointing into a church. A low opening in the limestone, half a door high, wore seaweed like a beard. Beyond it, darkness. We call it the mouth. There are smaller mouths and old smuggler stories that exaggerate everything except the danger. He brought the skiff in with a series of careful breaths from the oars. The bow kissed a tongue of rock. Up close, the cave wasn't quiet. It exhaled and inhaled in a bass the body heard more than the ear. Not the storm's loud theater, a patient motion. When a larger wave reached in, air pushed across Clara's face. It smelled of salt's oldest idea and something green that had never seen sun. Listen, Luca said. She did. The air moved, and in that movement there was rhythm, and in that rhythm. She noticed it only when he said nothing else. A small absence every 80 or so seconds, a pause so exact it made a heart want to flatter it with syncopation. The cave kept its count. The sea carried it. After big storms, Luca said, sometimes light gathers under the mouth. Not blue. He dipped his hand, then withdrew it, water ladders running from his fingers. You saw it from the ferry. Clara nodded. It pulsed. They watched the cave not perform. The patience required felt like prayer or surgery. A gull's shadow crossed the opening and broke into parts. Far away, someone laughed in a language shared by coasts. Your aunt helped us once, Lucas said without looking at her. Years ago, before Irina came. Sensors vanished in a winter squall. She knew the cliffs inside the way I know my own pockets. She took me down to a chamber I'd never seen, a room more shaped than room. She said it was where the house listened. Clara felt the weight of the brush in her bag, though it lay weightless. Did she tell you what I heard? The island, he said, and whoever needed to learn how to breathe. He eased the boat away from the mouth. They circled once, twice, memorizing edges. By the time they returned to the cove, the light had tilted toward afternoon. On the station's small dock, Irina stood with her arms crossed in a posture that implied affection, wearing disapproval's coat. You will not take her again without telling me first, she said, and kissed Lucas' cheek. To Clara she added, You will not follow him into any place with a name like the Mouth, unless he looks more afraid than he did today. I'll make a note, Clara said. Irina's expression softened into something almost private. You look like a person who is about to make a map with a tool that refuses to be a pen. Be sure of the map's language before you follow it. On the walk back to the villa, Clara collected that sentence and placed it beside others in the notebook she kept without paper, the one that lived behind her ribs. The island's afternoon had sharpened at the edges. Laundry flapped from a balcony like flags of truce. A child dragged a stick along a fence that had survived generations of sticks. At the villa gate, a plastic grocery bag hung from a latch. Inside, bread, tomatoes, a jar of anchovies wrapped in brown paper, and a folded receipt on which someone had written in a tidy, upright hand, "For the first night that feels like home." No signature. The bag smelled beyond kindness. She cooked and ate with the economy of someone assembling shelter from separate objects. Bread toasted and rubbed with garlic, tomatoes sliced and salted until they bled themselves sweet, and anchovy laid across each piece like punctuation. She ate standing, then sitting, then leaning back in a chair with her eyes closed as if that small dark behind the lids held the truth as tightly as any room. At dusk, the house refined itself into fewer things. The study, the stair, the hall lamp, a quiet sun. She laid out tools on the desk. She did not intend to touch the painting. She intended to watch it in good light, until it remembered it was a surface. But the olive wood brush lay where her hand could find it without looking. She picked it up the way a musician picks up an instrument that had been set down only to prove that setting it down had been possible. "Only the frame," she told the room, her voice reasonable. "Only the dirt at the edge." She dampened a cotton swab and ran it along the gilded frame where time stuck to beauty like silt. The work obeyed her. The frame brightened by increments. Her breath conspicuously left and returned. And then the smallest accident, which felt like intention wearing mercy. The swab slipped, the brush followed by instinct to catch, and the tips of the amber bristles barely kissed the edge of the painted veil. A sound rose in the room like the low beginning of wind through a field. Clara froze. She hadn't scored the surface. There was no mark she could see, but where the bristles had touched, the paint went translucent, not damaged, thin as a film of honey held to light. Beneath, not canvas, not primer, lines. She set the brush down very carefully, took the magnifying lens, and bent close, heart mutinous. Beneath the veil a drawing emerged, as if designed not for eyes but for the kind of seeing done in sleep. Curves and angles, a continuous line that mirrored, imperfectly and then perfectly, the eastern coast of the island. Another line, finer, ran under it, the outline of a cave system, the openings marked in tiny careful letters. And above the largest chamber, as if the painter had saved the truth for the last small space left, the inscription, Respiro. Breath. She lifted her head too fast, and the room tilted like a boat unnerved by a wake. The cave. The pulses, the hour that could not forget itself. The painting was not a portrait. It was a map disguised as one, a map that asked not where but how. Her phone vibrated. She didn't look at the screen. She pressed it to her ear with the absurd belief that doing so would change the identity of the caller. Static, then the sea, then a woman's voice from a long hallway. "Clara, Aunt Léonie?" Her whisper broke. "Where are you?" "I left you the line." The voice said, each word walking across a bridge of water. "Do not cut it." The connection snapped as if in, or had cracked in a hand. The display said 009. She set the phone down and pressed the heel of her palm to her eye until the bright patterns came and went like schools of small fish. Below the study the house stirred. Not footsteps. A draft and then a second. Inhaled and exhaled, as if the brick circle in the cellar had decided to remember being a doorway. Clara took the lamp and went. At the bottom of the stair, the corridor smelled of cool limestone and something that pretended to be citrus. The barred door stood closed but not latched, exactly as she had left it. When she pushed it, it moved without complaint, the way a thing old and forgiven moves. Inside, the air had changed. Not warmer, not colder, busier. The hair at her wrists lifted a little. She set the lamp near the brick circle and crouched. The seam in the plaster, the ladder cracked, had widened enough to take the edge of a blade. She slid the thin spatula from her pocket, a restorer's knife, flexible as an idea, and gently, incrementally, introduced it to the edge. Flake by flake, the plaster surrendered a crumb of itself. She did not force, she invited. The breath of the room kept company with her own. A sound, not in the wall, in the plaster, like a shell you hold to your ear that contains an ocean that isn't there. She pressed closer. From the seam came a whisper, not made of words, but the possibility of them. The shape of syllables about to become. She closed her eyes. The lamp went low, then righted itself. From inside the wall came the faintest scent of resin. She drew the spatula down another inch. The plaster lifted like a scab that has lost its loyalty to injury. Beneath, nothing. Beneath, stone. Beneath, her blade struck metal with a small, bright ring of a coin tossed into a fountain. She flinched, then smiled, breathless. She eased the plaster aside and revealed a narrow brass ring set into the stone like a punctuation mark designed by a jeweler. A pull? A hinge? She slid a finger through the ring and felt, unbelievably, the cool yield of a mechanism answering from within the wall. The way a violin answers a note when it is exactly in tune. The wall gave a small, reluctant sigh. A line opened where there had been none. A vertical seam as simple as an eyelid lifting in sleep. Air moved across her face from darkness, salt, stone, and, faintly, the green of things that choose caves over suns. The villa had not been only a house. Clara stood, lamp in one hand, the other on the brass ring, and for the second time in 2 days she told herself the truth out loud, because nothing else would keep the room from forgetting her voice. I am going to open this. The house did not disagree. It breathed. Somewhere above, a shutter tapped once. In the study, behind its veil, the map waited. On her finger, the pearl of hardened resin she had pocketed that morning pressed in the skin, as if eager to go where amber goes when it wants to be more than memory. She pulled. Stone released stone with the long, low sound of cello offering its first note. A narrow door swung inward, its edge finding a stop with certainty that must have been rehearsed when the world was catalogued in other languages. Beyond, steps cut into the cliff, descending in a small spiral that promised both restraint and danger. On the lintel above her head, the incised mark B12 glowed, not with light, but with attention, not a storage code, not only a coordinate disguised as a memory. Clara lifted the lamp higher. The stair swallowed the circle of light after 3 turns, asking for more faith than oil. She took one step down, then another. The breath of the island came up to meet her. It said nothing she could translate. Halfway to the next turn, she paused and looked back toward the door. Some part of her expected to see the villa closing its eye, sealing her away. But the room held. Above, shorelight. Behind, the life she had chosen not to leave yet. Ahead, the life that had been pulling at her sleeve since the ferry. She went on. The steps ended in a chamber cut by hand and by patient water. The floor sloped gently to a lip where a narrow ribbon of sea flowed in and out with the cave's pulse. The air hummed. It was not a sound that traveled to the ear. It traveled to the skin and set each small hair to attention. On the far wall, what she had taken for a natural seam proved to be paint, thin, patient washes of amber laid directly on stone. Not a picture, not exactly. A veil of pigment across rock. Transparent layers that turned the chamber's end into a surface and a promise. Clara raised a lamp, and the light struck the paint and did not bounce. It entered, as if the pigment had waited for the way a mouth waits for air. The veil breathed, not metaphor. It inhaled and exhaled with the sea's count. Draw, pause, release. And as it moved, the underdraw inside it, the caves, the mouth, the word respiro, shifted as if aligning to a map that included time. Clara reached without meaning to, and then stopped because to touch with a hand what wanted to be touched with a vowel felt like a mistake people write poems about after they make it. She took the olive wood brush from her bag, under the cave's breath. The bristles trembled the way tall grasses do when a train goes by. She dipped the brush in nothing. She lifted it toward the veil, stopping half an inch away. "Only enough," she said to her aunt, to the cliff, "to whatever use her bones for an address. Only enough to understand." The sea inhaled, She moved the brush a fraction, tracing the outline of the largest chamber, the one the map named Respiro. The veil thinned as if approving a confession. Beneath, a second word revealed itself in letters fine as hair. Sado. Below, she lowered the brush. The chamber's air pressed against her face with a pressure that comes just before a wave chooses its shape. The island's breath reached its quiet apex and held there, as if waiting for her to decide whether she would be the kind of person who enters a map or the kind who keeps it safe by pretending it was never drawn. Behind her, from the stair, a sound, not threat, feet finding stone with care. A voice she recognized, low and astonished and not alone. Clara. Lucas said from the doorway, breathless in a way that meant he had run, and had not yet chosen whether to be ashamed of it. You need to see what to see, just did. Another set of footsteps, lighter, and the clean certainty of Irina's voice in the dark. And you need to tell us why your house keeps time with water. Clara turned toward them, the lamp casting a soft boundary around their faces. She felt the pearl of resin warm against her skin, as if agreeing to a contract signed with air. The map, she said, her voice steadying into the room's single note. It was never only a painting. She lifted the lamp and the veil on the wall. Their veil now breathed in, breathed out, and showed them where below began. Chapter 5. Below the line. They stood at the threshold of the chamber, 3 outlines walled in amber breath. Luca's hair was damp with sea mist. Irina's glasses had picked up a fine sugar salt. The lamp's circle did not travel far, but it traveled enough to make the room choose its edges. The sea, Luca said, his voice a notch lower than its usual register, just sent a pulse up the cove strong enough to wake every sensor in a mile's radius. Not blue, amber. It synced clean at 84 seconds for 9 full minutes, then cut as if told. Irina's eyes had learned to collect details without announcing them. Your wall, she said to Clara, not unkindly accusing the veil. It breathes on the same count. Clara turned the lamp, so the light rinsed the painted surface. The wash of amber shifted and steadied, the way an animal's flank moves when it sleeps and knows who is near. Beneath the veil, the map's underdrawing held. Coast, cave mouths, that central chamber marked Respiro, and the new word she had coaxed out with a brush. Sado. Below. Irina translated, kneeling to bring her sight even with the mark. Below what? Clara raised the olive wood brush. It had taken up her hand as if it had been waiting for it. She did not touch the paint. She traced the air of fingers width from the veil, following the line that defined the largest cavern. The pigment thinned at her nearness, obedient to a recipe only her aunt fully knew, revealing a second layer that was neither stone nor paint but a pattern. Spiral glyphs, not letters, a language of curves that suggested current and breath together. Resonance, Irina murmured, a scientist's prayer, a pattern that responds to frequency. Luca had drifted forward and stopped an inch short of the line Clara had not drawn, but had made in the room by standing where she stood. He gestured at the narrow ribbon of sea entering and leaving the chamber. If the cave is a lung, this, he shifted his hand, is the trachea. The pulses are breath, not signal. Clara found her voice calm, because the rest of her refused to be. What happens if we sing to it? Irina made a noise that lived somewhere between delight and warning. It might answer, or it might do nothing. Or, she stood and pushed her glasses up with one knuckle. It might remember an old agreement and honor it. Clara did not sing. She did what she knew. She set the lamp down, opened her bag, and took out a tuning fork she carried because certain rooms needed A440 as much as they needed light. She struck it softly against a stone, just enough to wake the metal without wounding it, and held it near the veil. The pitch rang true in the chamber, a straight line drawn in air. For an instant, nothing changed. Then the amber wash lifted, barely, like the surface tension of water, giving to the idea of a fingertip, and the underdrawing spirals aligned. Each curve finding a sibling curve in the pitch until the map looked less like a picture and more like a score. The sea's breath matched, faltered, matched again. The lamp's flame leaned toward the wall, as if curious. Luca exhaled the kind of breath people let out when they did not know they were holding it. Irina whispered, not to be heard. Cathedral of small truths, indeed. The pitch faded. The veil settled, not inert, merely waiting. Clara lowered the fork. Her mouth had gone dry. The brick circle above in the cellar had turned out to be a door. This veil was a door that refused to be either open or closed. She thought her aunt's letter. Some fractures are doors. The painting was a fracture taught to look whole. We need to see the central chamber, Luca said. Irina answered without looking away from the wall. At low tide with a rope? Yes. From the sea in daylight. Preferably when I can bribe the wind to behave. Not tonight. We'll mark the path now, Clara said, so we don't lose it when the dark pretends to be more than it is. She set the lamp toward the back wall and found chalk in her pocket. A restorer's habit, for sketching boundaries before work began. On a dry section of stone, she made a small arrow, nothing permanent, everything helpful, at the stair. She chalked a second mark, Sopra, a message to herself that said remember up in case down became too convincing. They left the chamber reluctantly, like diners from a table that still held warm plates. In the cellar, Clara pressed a stone door back into place. The seam vanished into its long rehearsal. Only the brass ring remained visible if you knew where to look, and if your hand remembered the shape. Upstairs, the hall had put on its safest face. The lamp bent a soft hemisphere over the table. Night beyond the shutters measured itself honestly. No more, no less. Tea, Irina said, as if declaring a variable solved. And bread, she added, seeing the heel on the cutting board. She smiled. And your anchovies, if you will forgive a thief. They ate like people who had sworn not to name the thing that still stood in the room. Between swallows, Luca told them what the sensors had recorded, what had failed, what had held. 3 pulses at triple intensity between 3:09 and 3:12, he said, wiping a crumb from the table with the side of his hand. Then the line went flat. The sea loves drama and then disdains it. 3:12, Clara said, looking past him at the mantel where the clock had died. It has a sense of humor. Irina traced the numbers with a fingertip on the table, an old professor's habit, or a sense of mnemonic. Patterns that want to be remembered tie themselves to things we can't stop seeing. Clara fetched the olive wood brush without thinking. When she set it on the table, both of them looked at it as if it had spoken. Olive holds oil even when it's old, Irina said. It's why spoons made of it never forget soup. She leaned close. These bristles, were you? Clara turned the brush so the light licked the tips. I wondered if they were a blend, animal hair and synthetic, but under light they behave like resin, as if they've tasted amber and want more. Luca's gaze traveled between brush and Clara with a candor that made her want, briefly, to be someone else. If the veil is a door for breath, the brush might be a key for seeing. Keys do not like to stay idle. I won't touch the paint tonight, Clara said, hearing in her own voice the same promise every addict makes sincerely. But I'll make a copy of the underdrawing. The map. In the morning, we go by boat. In the morning, Irina agreed. If the sea confesses calm. She rose, gathered her cup, then placed her hand over Clara's on the back of the chair in an unshowy benediction. Sleep near a light. Sometimes that is enough to convince a house you are a guest and not an offering. After they left, their good nights normalized at the threshold like ordinary neighbors. Clara stood a while listening to the villa's patient noises. She took her notebook to the study and set up the tracing paper over the painting, careful to anchor the edges far from pigment. With the finest pencil she owned, she followed the underdrawing where the veil had thinned. The coastline, the cave mouths, the long central hollow. When she reached the chamber labeled Respiro, she hesitated. The pencil hovered. The word below it had not been meant for daylight, and yet here it was. Sato. She copied it anyway, hand steady. Halfway through, her phone lit with a message from an unknown number. No text. A single image, a photograph that looked decades old. A staircase cut in rock, a woman at its top with her head turned as if someone had called her name. The woman's posture was painfully familiar. A scarf at her throat, a hand on the wall, the other lifting in a gesture that apologized to no one. The caption below in tiny mechanical type, Archivio Lyra 1974, Accesso Grat d'Ambra. Her aunt's profile might have been anyone's, but Clara knew. The knowledge came without argument, the way a smell retrieves a childhood room with all its furniture. A second image arrived before she could reply. A close-up of a carved mark on stone, B12, rendered in such detail that she could see the tool chatter in the curve of the two. Her chest went hollow. She typed, "Who is this?" No answer came, only the soft mimic of the sea outside, working the cliff into the shape it wanted. She returned to the tracing and finished it. The result was clean but incomplete. Copies are always on their best behavior. When she finally lay down on the sofa, the lamp burning low, she did not sleep so much as fold herself into the shape the night allowed. Dreams took her anyway. No water this time. A corridor lined with shelves, each shelf filled with fragile objects wrapped in tissue. She unwrapped one and found not a bowl or a book, but sound, the high, exact tone of a violin tuned to A. The note stretched like silk, and on its surface something glittered, resin powder. She looked at her hands and saw the letters B, 12 stamped in faint ink across her palm like a warehouse clerk's mark. When she turned, thinking she heard footsteps, the corridor narrowed to width of breath, and from the far in a voice she knew, her aunt's yes but younger, said, "Don't cut the line, Clara. Let it pull you." She woke at 3:12, laughing once into the empty room, because repetition is a bully and a comfort. The lamp had burned down to a small, disciplined flame. She poured a little oil, it obliged. A whisper came from the study. Not voice, not wind. The kind of sound that exists so you can tell yourself you imagined it. She got up, unwilling to be the kind of person who stays down when a house speaks. The painting held its night face, compliant and unreadable. But over the tracing paper she had left taped along the edges, a fine dust had settled, golden, barely there. She brushed a fingertip across it and brought back a scatter that smelled impossibly of pine and citrus and light. Amber dust. She tasted the air like a cautious animal. The dust was not falling from anywhere she could see. It was simply there, as if the veil had breathed out and forgot to take everything back in. On the desk, the olive wood brush had rotated half an inch, its bristles pointing toward the word Sado, as if they understood maps. "Fine," she said, her voice surprising her with its readiness. In the morning, she returned to the sofa and sat instead of lying down. She did not close her eyes. The island's breath counted itself into the next hour. A small rain began and tested the shutters for loyalty. Somewhere far and low, thunder rolled like furniture moved across a downstairs room she did not own. At first light, she stood and washed her face in cold water that made every nerve remember its job. She packed the tracing, the notebook, the brush, a coil of rope, chalk, the tuning fork. She thought of adding a superstition and chose, without ceremony, the small pearl of hardened resin she had kept in the notebook's pocket. She slid it into her jeans watch pocket, a relic in a place made for keeping time, and buttoned it closed. By 8, the sky had made a treaty with itself. Luca's text arrived. Tide is shy. Wind cooperative. Meet at the station in 20 minutes. On her way out, she paused in the study. The veil waited, benign. The dust had gathered again, the light catching in it like summer in a jar. She whispered a word she had not said aloud since she was a child. Not a prayer, a promise that borrowed the shape of prayer. "I'll bring it back," she told the room. "Whatever it is we're borrowing." The house made the sound houses make when the day begins, and they decide not to divulge their private names for everything. She closed the door gently and took the lane downhill. The marine station sat with its polite machines and its stubborn hope. Lucas stood by the skiff with 2 life vests and that look. Clear, intent, already a fraction of where they were going. Irina had a waterproof pack and a thermos that said in its modest way that she had rescued more people with tea than any storm had nearly taken. "Before we go," Irina said, almost conversational, "tell me about B12. Clara gripped the rail. A mark in the cellar above the door. The same mark on the lintel of the hidden stair. And once, years ago, in a museum in Germany, on a crate that held a violin with no known maker. I was an intern. The case was stamped B12. Luca's eyes flicked to the sea. then back. And when I traced the stamp, my palm felt warm. Ridiculous, I know. But yesterday the same heat came back when I saw the mark in the stone. Not ridiculous, Irina said, with the briskness of someone arranging ingredients, a system of cataloging, or a coordinate, or a story that insists on using numbers to give itself a spine. Or all three, Luca said. He handed Clara a vest. Ready? She nodded. They pushed off. The skiff cut the water, patient as a metronome. The cliff presented its serious face. At the mouth, the sea breathed in, breathed out, the light under the surface. No flash yet, only a quiet the color of kept promises. They went in. The oars whispered. The ceiling descended until it did not. The chamber opened, larger than Clara had expected, taller, the walls polished by centuries of tide and hand. Above the ribbon of water, ledges stepped back like seating in a theater waiting for a performance that would be mostly dark and mostly sound. There, Luca said, pointing to a shadow that was not only shadow, a vertical seam cut by men, and then made modest by time. Another door. Clara's chest answered with a small, unreasonable joy. She reached into her bag and touched the pearl of resin through denim. It pressed back warm. The skiff bumped a rock dressed in velvet algae. Irina steadied them with the oar and said, without drama, whatever you open, you must be able to close. Agreed, Clara said, and took the rope. The wall breathed. The island counted. She looked at Luca, who had grown very still, and was watching her the way a person watches a note right before it begins. Below, she said, and smiled despite the fierce teeth. Let's see what the veil meant. Chapter 6. The Chamber of Names. The skiff nosed forward like an animal that trusted more than it understood. The air inside the cave was dense and cold, tasting faintly of minerals and time. Water dripped from somewhere above in a rhythm that felt deliberate, as if the cave itself were marking seconds. Luca rowed with small, soundless strokes. Irina leaned forward with her flashlight, its beam slicing the dark in a slow pendulum. The walls glistened with salt and something else, veins of amber-colored stone that caught the light and held it for an extra breath before letting go. Clara sat at the bow, the rope coiled beside her, the olive wood brush tucked into her jacket. Her pulse was steady, not calm, but steady. Every sense in her body was tuned to the cave's slow breathing, to the pulse beneath the water that matched the rhythm of her own heart. After a few minutes, the tunnel widened. The sound of the open sea faded behind them, replaced by a heavy silence that filled the space like liquid. Ahead, the passage narrowed again, forming an arch of smooth rock only a few feet above the waterline. Luca ducked instinctively as they passed beneath it. Beyond the arch, the chamber opened like a lung. It was vast, larger than the villa above, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls curved like the inside of a shell. The air shimmered faintly with gold dust, and a faint hum pulsed in the center of the floor where the sea pooled in a circular basin. It wasn't the roar of a current or the noise of tide. It was a low, steady thrum of something alive. Clara could hardly breathe. This is it, she whispered. The Respiro. Irina's flashlight trembled in her hand. There's structure, she said softly. Stones shaped by people, not waves. Look, those ridges, those marks, they're carved. Luca ran his fingers along one of the grooves. And these, they're letters. Clara knelt by the basin, setting the lamp on a ledge beside her. The surface of the water was perfectly still. When she leaned closer, she saw not a reflection, but something beneath it, lines, symbols, curves faintly illuminated as though light came from within the rock below. The word Sato surfaced in her mind like a remembered melody. She unbuttoned the pocket of her jeans and took out the small pearl of hardened resin. It gleamed faintly, warm against her skin. Without thinking, she held it above the basin. What are you doing? Irina asked sharply. I need to know what it's for, Clara murmured. The pearl pulsed once, softly, like a heartbeat, and then dissolved, turning to a stream of golden dust that sank through the air and disappeared into the water. The basin shuddered. The water began to move, slow at first, then faster, spiraling in a deliberate circle. The hum deepened. The light beneath the surface grew brighter until the entire chamber glowed in hues of amber and gold. Luca gripped the side of the skiff. Clara stepped back. But she couldn't. She was transfixed. The spiral in the basin tightened, and the light rose in a column that reached the ceiling. For an instant, the amber light formed shapes, faces, outlines of figures moving within the glow like silhouettes behind a curtain. She heard whispers layered over each other, speaking in a language made of air and memory. Then one voice separated itself from the others. Clara. It was her aunt's voice. Clear. Close. The column of light shimmered, and from its center a figure began to emerge, a woman veiled in translucent gold, her body made of light and dust, her face obscured but familiar in its outline. Léonie, Clara breathed. The veiled figure turned toward her. You opened it, she said softly, her words carried by the hum of the chamber. You've crossed the line. I had to, Clara said, stepping closer to the basin. You said not to restore it, but I needed to understand. Her aunt's figure tilted her head, the gesture so human it made Clara's chest ache. Understanding has a cost. The veil binds what breathes. Once open, it cannot sleep again. Irina whispered, Is this projection? Bioluminescent phenomenon. But her voice was distant. The air around the basin had thickened, vibrating like the space between two notes of the same frequency. Luca stepped forward, his hand at Clara's shoulder. Clara, whatever this is, it's reacting to you. We need to. The light flared. The voices rose into a single long note that trembled the stone beneath their feet. The water surged upward and burst into droplets that hung, suspended in the air, each one holding a fragment of the amber glow. For a moment, Clara saw within them brief glimpses. Faces, doors, corridors, a violin, a map, all floating like dreams caught in glass. Then the light fell back into the basin and vanished. Silence crashed into the chamber, absolute and deep. The only sound was Clara's breathing and the soft echo of dripping water. When her eyes adjusted, she realized that something had changed. The wall opposite the basin, smooth before, now bore a new mark. The same letter and number. B, 12, carved clean and fresh, still weeping a thin line of golden sap. Clara touched her fingers to it. The resin was warm. Luca's voice was quiet. What does it mean? It's not a code, she said. It's a name. Irina tilted her head. A name. Clara nodded slowly. The amber veil, the thing my aunt called a breath, it remembers the people who cross it. It gives them a mark, a designation. B12 is in place. Her hand trembled against the wall. It's me. The realization hollowed her chest. Every instinct screamed that something had shifted, something that could not be reversed. She turned to Luca and Irina. We need to leave. They didn't argue. The hum had stopped, but the silence had taken on a new shape, like a creature holding its breath, waiting. They climbed back into the skiff. As Luca pushed them away from the chamber, the basin gave one last, small sigh, the sound of the sea inhaling through the narrow passage that led to the outside world. The amber glow dimmed and sank beneath the surface, until only black water remained. By the time they reached the cove, the light outside had changed. Clouds were gathering, the kind that meant rain without warning. The island looked almost indifferent, as though it had witnessed too many miracles to care for one more. At the dock, Irina stepped out first. You'll document everything, she said to Luca, her voice shaking slightly. Every reading, every fluctuation. I'll run the data tonight. Then, to Clara, quietly, be careful what you touch now. Some things know your name. That night, the storm returned. Clara stood at the villa's upper window, watching the sea burn with lightning. Every flash revealed the cliffs, the restless foam, and, just for a second, the faint, impossible shimmer of amber beneath the waves. She turned from the window and found the study door open. She didn't remember leaving it that way. The painting inside glowed faintly, the veiled woman's outline more distinct than ever. And for the first time, the veil wasn't just breathing. It was watching her. Chapter 7. The Blood of the Veil. Dawn arrived in bruises of color, purple melting into gray, gray melting into gold, a sky uncertain whether to heal or to hide. The storm had broken in the small hours, but its breath still lingered. Gutters whispered, the cliffs wept in slow rivulets, and every surface of Villa Ambra glistened with the sweat of the night. Clara sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. She had not slept. Each time her eyes closed, the chamber returned, the amber light rising like lungs, the whisper of her aunt's voice, and the terrible certainty of the mark that now lived inside her. B12. It was no longer coincidence, no longer a code. It was a claim. The house smelled faintly of resin again. She rose, following the scent down the hall. It grew stronger near the study, sweet and sharp, like pine caught on fire. The door was ajar. Inside, the painting waited, not still but alive. The amber veil across the woman's face shimmered with light that had no source. Dust hung in the air, and Clara realized with a small jolt that the golden motes weren't floating down from above. They were rising, pulled from the floor, the walls, her own skin. "Stop," she whispered, though she didn't know whether she was talking to the house or to herself. The veil pulsed once, a slow inhale. Then, across the bottom edge of the canvas, new cracks began to appear, fine, deliberate lines that spread outward like veins beneath skin. From within them, something began to emerge, a second layer of paint, older than the surface, older perhaps than the villa itself. Clara fetched a small lamp and leaned close. Beneath the translucent amber, she could see fragments of shapes, letters, curves. She dampened a cotton swab, tested the solvent, and began to clean a single square inch at a time. The top varnish gave way easily, too easily. Underneath lay a set of names, painted in the same looping script as her aunt's. Léonie Moreau, Émile Moreau, Adeline Moreau, and then at the very end, in pigment still wet as though painted that morning, Clara Moreau. Her knees gave out. She sank to the floor, the brush falling from her hand. "No," she said aloud, shaking her head. "You can't." But the letters gleamed, sealing themselves into the canvas, the amber glaze closing over them like a wound that heals too fast. When she touched her name, the paint was warm. Beneath her fingertip, she felt a faint pulse, 1, 2, 3, matching the rhythm of the sea outside. She backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. "You're taking me," she whispered. "You're riding me in." At noon, Luca arrived, soaked from the walk up the hill. "You didn't answer," he said. "I tried calling you 10 times. Clara motioned him into the study. "Look." He froze when he saw the painting. The air itself seemed to resist movement. The veiled woman's outline was sharper now, the features almost visible beneath the amber wash. Not a stranger's face anymore, but something shifting between forms. Léonie, then Clara, then both at once. "I touched the varnish," Clara said, her voice brittle. "There were names. My family, and then mine." Luca stepped closer, but not too close. "Your aunt's name is there too?" "Yes." But the paint was still wet. She ran a trembling hand through her hair. "Luca, the mark in the cave, the call on my phone, it's all connected. I think my family's been bound to this place for generations. The veil doesn't just hold breath, it holds blood." He looked at her, trying to find the language that would make that possible. "You're saying it's alive?" "I'm saying it remembers." She turned to the wall behind the painting, where the plaster bulged slightly. Taking a palette knife, she pried at the seam. A square of plaster lifted free, revealing a hollow space barely large enough for a hand. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thin leather journal tied with gold thread. Luca helped her unwrap it. The pages were fragile, but the ink had survived. Each page bore sketches of the same spiral symbols from the cave, drawn over and over with slight variations. At the top of the first page, her aunt had written in French, "The veil is a covenant between sea and blood. Each bearer must breathe for both." Clara traced a line. "Sea and blood," she whispered. "Breath for both. That's why the pulses match the tides." Luca frowned. "What happens when one stops?" She closed the book. "The other dies." For a long time, neither spoke. The villa creaked, a small groan like someone shifting in sleep. Then Luca said quietly, If your aunt's right, the island isn't just listening to you. It's surviving through you. That evening, Irina arrived with printouts and tired eyes. "You'd better see this," she said, spreading the papers across the kitchen table. "Graphs, timestamps, waveforms. We kept recording after you left. The pulses didn't fade. They moved. The source point shifted from the cove to directly beneath this hill, right below your house." Clara's stomach turned when, exactly at 3:12 a.m., Luca leaned over the charts. "It's following her. Or she's following it," Irina said. "Either way, it's relocated." Clara stared at the graphs until the lines blurred. "Then it's true. The veil isn't in the cave anymore." She looked up at them. "It's here." Irina exhaled. If the patterns tie to biology, to heart rate, respiration, it might synchronize with you. The island found a new lung. "Meaning what?" Luca asked. "Meaning she's part of the mechanism now." Irina said softly, "If the pulses stop, either she stops or the island does." Silence filled the room again. The clock on the mantel still pointed to 3:12, but for the first time since she'd arrived, Clara noticed that its second hand had moved, not forward but backward, ticking once every few breaths. Outside, thunder murmured far out at sea. The day was already dimming. Clara closed her aunt's journal and pressed her palm over the mark B. 12 burned faintly into her skin. She could feel the pulse beneath it, not painful, just steady like a tether between her and the sea. "I need to go back down," she said. Luca looked at her as though she'd just stepped onto the edge of the cliff. "Tonight? It won't wait. It's changing rhythm." Irina sighed. "If you're going, you'll take sensors and a line." She began sorting through her pack, muttering in Spanish under her breath. If the island wants to keep her, it'll have to log the data first. By midnight, the storm had returned. Thinner, colder, the kind of rain that whispered rather than shouted. Clara led the way down the hidden stair, lamp in hand, the others following close. The air grew denser with each step. The hum that once came from the cave now vibrated through the villa's bones. In the cellar, the brass ring glowed faintly. Clara pulled. The door opened on a breath of air, so cold it turned their exhalations to smoke. The chamber below was transformed. The amber glow no longer came from the walls or the basin, but from the air itself, a mist of golden light swirling in lazy spirals. The sea's ribbon had receded, replaced by a floor of translucent stone under which light moved like blood beneath skin. Irina gasped. "It's alive?" Clara stepped forward. "It's breathing through me." She knelt at the center of the chamber. Her pulse matched the light's rhythm exactly. She felt it tug, not outward but inward, as though something inside her chest were aligning with a larger heartbeat. Then the voices came again, not from the air this time, but from within her. Léonie's voice and others older than language, speaking as one. Each name feeds the next. The line unbroken. Breath becomes blood, blood becomes light. Clara pressed her hands to the stone. "How do I end it?" she asked. The answer rose from the chamber itself, vibrating through her bones. "You cannot end what you are. You can only choose where to breathe." The light flared, and for an instant she saw everything. The villa above, the island's spiral caves, the threads of amber connecting them, and herself at the center, not trapped, but woven in. When the glow subsided, she was on her knees, Luca's hands gripping her shoulders. Irina crouched beside them, shaking. "What happened?" he demanded. Clara looked at her palms. The mark B, 12 had vanished. In its place, a faint pattern of golden veins traced her skin. "It's done," she said softly. "But it's not over." She looked up toward the stairs, where a faint breeze moved through the darkness. Not a draft, but a sigh. The villa was breathing again. Chapter 8. The House That Remembers. The rain had stopped before dawn, leaving the world rinsed clean and quiet. Mist curled up from the cliffs in slow spirals, weaving itself around the cypress trees that guarded the villa. The sea below was unnaturally calm, a mirror that refused to break. Clara woke to the smell of salt and damp linen. Her body felt both heavy and light, as if she'd been emptied of something essential and refilled with air. When she sat up, the bedsheet clung to her skin with a faint shimmer of gold dust. For a long moment she just stared at her hands. The faint veins of amber from the night before still traced her palms, thin as spider silk, pulsing softly in rhythm with her heartbeat. She pressed her fingers to her wrist. The pulse was steady, too steady. It didn't waver with breath or thought. It moved with the rhythm of the sea. A soft knock came at the door. "Clara?" Luca's voice low, hesitant. She pulled on a sweater and opened the door. His eyes went immediately to her hands. "You're glowing." She looked down. The light under her skin was faint, visible only in the dimness of the hallway, like the last light of a candle through thin paper. "It's the island," she said, "or what's left of it inside me." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Irina's at the station. The sensors are behaving strangely again." The pulse moved inland during the night, directly under Villa Ambra. "It's centered on you." Clara exhaled. "Then I suppose it's not finished." They walked to the house together, checking rooms, opening shutters, letting in the pale morning light. Everything looked ordinary, too ordinary. The only difference was the silence. The usual hum of the villa, the faint ticking of its invisible lungs, had stopped. At the end of the corridor, Clara noticed something strange. The floorboards outside the study were damp, not from the storm but from below, as if the house itself had begun to seep seawater through its bones. She touched the wood. It was cold. The faint smell of resin lingered. "Luca," she whispered. "Look." He knelt beside her. "It's bleeding," he murmured, from the grain. The wetness shimmered under the light. Not water, but something thicker, gold-tinged. Amber sap, the same substance that had wept from the mark in the cave. A chill climbed her spine. "It's spreading." He looked up at her. "You said last night it was done." "So did I," she said. "But maybe it's only beginning." In the study, the painting had changed again. The woman in the veil was gone. Only the veil itself remained, suspended in the amber light, swirling like mist trapped beneath glass. The background had shifted subtly. What had once been an interior now resembled a landscape, cliffs, a shore, a house half buried in sunlight. Luca stepped closer. "That's the villa." "Yes." Her voice was a whisper. "But not as it is, as it was." She took down the painting and turned it over. The back was covered in old handwriting. Not her aunt's this time, but her grandfather's. There were dates, measurements, coordinates, and at the bottom, in block letters, Project B, 12, Continuum Study, property of the Moreau Institute. Clara stared at it. Institute. "I didn't know your family had one," Luca said. "They didn't," she said slowly. "At least, not in my lifetime." She flipped through the journal again. Halfway through, she found a folded letter written on aged stationery, the ink a faded brown. It was addressed to Léonie Moreau, Villa Ambra. She unfolded it carefully. "Dearest Léonie, if you are reading this, then the cycle has begun again. The veil will seek a new anchor. You must remember, it was not meant to be eternal. The amber breath binds more tightly with each generation. Every name added to the painting strengthens the chain. You must find the one marked B, 12. That is a terminus point, the bridge where the sea will stop listening and begin speaking. When the veil opens fully, it will not give breath. It will take it. Our family began this covenant in arrogance. It must end in understanding. Emile Moreau." Clara lowered the page, her hands shaking. "He knew," she whispered. "My grandfather. He started this." Luca frowned. Then Léonie tried to stop it. She didn't succeed. Clara turned to the painting, her eyes wide with new clarity. "That's why she died here. Because she didn't finish the cycle. The veil took her." The air in the room shifted. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the villa itself had inhaled. The curtains lifted without wind. The lamp flickered once, then steadied, and then she heard it. A voice, faint, almost imperceptible, coming from behind the walls. Clara, her name, carried like breath through a lung. She froze. "Luca, did you hear that?" He shook his head. "I didn't." The voice came again, louder. This time it was unmistakably Léonie's. "You must finish it." Clara backed toward the center of the room. "Finish what?" The painting quivered against the wall, its frame vibrating softly. The surface rippled like water, and for a moment she saw a reflection in it. A woman standing at the cliff's edge, veil fluttering in the wind, her features hidden by light. Then the image shifted. The veil darkened, turning from amber to deep red, and a single word appeared across it in thin letters of light. "Return." Luca caught her arm. "Clara." But the sound that filled the room drowned everything else. The unmistakable crash of waves against stone. Though the sea was half a mile below them, the air thickened with salt. Books fell from the shelves as if shaken by an unseen hand. Clara clutched the frame. "She's not dead," she said. "Léonie's not gone. She's inside it." "Inside the veil?" "Inside the island," Clara said. She became its voice. The floorboards beneath them creaked, then gave a long, slow sigh. From the cracks, golden resin began to rise, threading upward toward the ceiling in streams of light. The house wasn't bleeding anymore. It was breathing. The word on the painting brightened, every letter glowing like embers. "Return." Luca pulled her back. "We need to leave." But Clara shook her head. "No, this is what it wants me to see." The air shimmered, and for a heartbeat the study wasn't a study anymore. It was a chamber below, the sea glowing through the floor, Léonie standing at its center with her hand raised. "Clara," her aunt said, her voice echoing across water and time. "You are the last breath. The cycle ends when you return the name." "How?" Clara shouted, but the image was already fading. Only her aunt's last words remained, whispered into her mind as clearly as if she'd spoken them beside her ear. "Not the sea, not the veil, the blood. Follow the line." Then the light collapsed, the house exhaled, and the room went dark. When the silence settled again, Luca was holding her shoulders, shaking. "Clara, talk to me." She opened her eyes. The painting lay shattered at her feet, the canvas torn clean down the center. Through the tear, the wall behind it was visible, and in the plaster, carved deep and fresh, was a map of the island. At the center of the map, a single mark gleamed gold. B12. Luca's voice was a whisper. "What's there?" Clara stared at the mark, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "The cliffs," she said. "The same place where Léonie disappeared." She turned toward the window, where the sea shone faintly in the distance, gold against the gray sky. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady now, "we go back." Chapter 9. The edge of the map. The island woke beneath a low, pewter sky. The sea lay flat and patient, a single muscle waiting to move. Clara stood on the terrace above the cliffs, wind pushing strands of hair across her face. The air tasted metallic, like the moment before a storm decides whether to return. Luca tightened the rope coiled across his shoulder. "The tide will turn at noon. We should be down and back before then." She nodded. Her sleep had been short, shallow, and filled with whispers she could no longer separate from memory. The faint lines of amber still pulsed beneath her skin, each beat an instruction. They followed the path that wound behind the garden, where the cliff dropped away in long stair-steps of stone. The mark on the map in the torn wall of the study, B12, had aligned perfectly with the stretch of coast. Every few meters, the rock bore traces of carved lines, as if generations had returned here to check the same answer and had never agreed on what it meant. Halfway down, Luca paused. "Look." A groove in the stone formed a perfect spiral, its center dark with seaweed and salt. Inside it, something gleamed, a bead of amber fused into the rock itself. Clara touched it. It was warm. Beneath her fingers, the spiral hummed like the echo of her own pulse. "This is one of the anchor points," she said. "My aunt wrote about them in her journal, The Gates of Breath. Each one binds a name." Luca looked out toward the water. Then B12 must be the final gate. They descended the last stretch, the sound of waves growing heavier until it filled the air like a slow drum. At the base of the cliff, the sea pressed into a narrow inlet surrounded by black rock. Foam gathered there, thick and luminous, and above it a small stone platform jutted from the wall. Carved smooth, unnatural in its precision. The mark was there. B12. It glowed faintly, not carved but seared into the surface. Around it, veins of amber ran down the rock like frozen tears, feeding into the sea below. Clara stepped onto the platform. The moment her boots touched it, the sound changed. No longer the crash of waves, but a single, sustained tone, low and resonant. The stone vibrated under her feet. Luca called out, "Clara, wait!" But the wind carried his voice away. She knelt and pressed both hands to the mark. The warmth spread instantly up her arms, across her chest, to the rhythm of her heart. Her vision blurred. The cliffs seemed to tilt. The water beneath her began to glow, the same golden hue as the cave's breath. Then came the voice. Not Léonie this time. Older, deeper, layered with centuries. "You are the last of the line. The breath must return." The mark brightened, burning through her skin. For an instant she saw beneath the surface of the sea a vast network of tunnels threaded with light. The same spiral she had traced on the map. At its center lay a single shape, human, veiled, motionless, bathed in amber. Her aunt, Léonie, preserved within the resin of the island itself, her body suspended like an insect in honey, eyes closed, lips parted as though she were mid-breath. The realization struck like lightning. Léonie hadn't died. She had merged, become the island's lung, the vessel of the breath. Clara's pulse sank to the glow, faster now. The air thickened. She felt the pull again, the same tether that had connected her to the sea since the night she arrived. It wanted her. The island wanted her to take Léonie's place. "No," she whispered. "Not yet." The light flared. The stone under her hands cracked, spiderwebbing outward. The sound was immense, like the world inhaling. Lucas scrambled forward, shouting her name, grabbing the rope. "Clara, you have to let go." "I can't," she gasped. "It's pulling." He anchored himself against a boulder and wrapped the rope around her waist. Then we pulled together. For a moment, there were two parts of the same breath, her body leaning into the light, his weight dragging against it. The glow throbbed, uncertain which to obey. The tone in the air broke into smaller notes, dissonant, desperate. Then, with a sound like stone surrendering, the mark dimmed. The glow receded into the sea. Clara collapsed against Luca, chest heaving. The rope went slack. They stayed like that for a long time, the tide creeping toward their boots. When the light finally died, the mark on the platform was gone. Only a small crack remained, and from it a single drop of resin rose like breath and hardened in the air. Luca caught it in his palm. "What now?" Clara's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "She let me go." He looked at her. "Your aunt." She wanted release. The veil needed an ending, not another name. She closed her fingers around the pearl of resin. Maybe this is it. Back at the villa, the change was immediate. The air felt lighter, as if the walls had exhaled for the first time in years. The golden veins in the floorboards had vanished. The painting in the study was gone entirely, leaving behind only a faint outline of light on the wall where it had hung. Clara set the resin pearl on the mantel. "She's free." Luca leaned against the doorway. "And you?" Clara looked out toward the sea, where the clouds were parting into thin ribbons of silver. "I think I am too. The island's still breathing, but now it breathes on its own." He smiled, tired and full of wonder. "Then maybe it's finally alive." She turned to him, the faint glow in her hands fading until it was no more than warmth. "No," she said softly. "It always was. It just needed someone to listen." That night, she dreamed of Léonie standing on the cliffs, her veil gone, her face calm, her voice the wind itself. "Every breath you take here will remember me," she said, "and every tide will remember you." When Clara awoke, the sea was whispering against the rocks, the rhythm steady and human. The villa smelled of salt and pine, and the faint sweetness of amber. The cycle had ended, but the veil, she knew, would always be there, waiting in the air between one heartbeat and the next, ready to breathe again. Chapter 10. The Last Breath. 3 weeks later, the island had learned how to be quiet again. The tourists had begun to return, trickling off the morning ferries with cameras and sunglasses, pointing at the cliffs without knowing what they had once hidden. The market square smelled of bread and lemons, and somewhere a street musician played a violin whose notes carried over the roofs like a thread of gold. From the terrace of Villa Ambra, Clara watched it all. The sea was calm, untroubled, its color no longer amber but the deep blue of ordinary days. For the first time since she'd arrived, she could not hear the hum beneath it, the breath, the pulse, the whispered heartbeat of the island. It had gone silent, not dead, but sleeping, peaceful. The villa itself had changed. The air no longer held that faint taste of resin. The walls no longer sighed when she passed. It was lighter, emptier, and in that emptiness she could finally breathe. She ran her fingers across the mantel where the pearl of hardened resin lay. It had shrunk since that night, almost transparent now, catching the sunlight like a fragment of glass. Inside it, if she held it close enough to her eye, she could see a thin wisp of air trapped forever, a single breath waiting. Luca had gone back to the marine station 2 days earlier. He sent messages sometimes, photographs of tide charts, small jokes about the island pretending to behave. Irina had left for Naples with a crate of samples and the kind of tired joy only a scientist in love with mystery can wear. Clara had stayed behind to close the house. She had scrubbed floors, folded sheets, opened every window to let the wind find its way through the rooms one last time. Each sound had meaning. The creak of stairs, the rattle of shutters, the distant sigh of the cove. They were the house's farewell. She had decided to leave that afternoon, take the last ferry, watch the island shrink to a speck in the horizon, and promise herself not to look back. But as she was gathering her things, something caught her attention. On the wall where the painting had once hung, faint against the plaster, a shimmer moved, like heat above sand. She stepped closer. The light shifted, forming the outline of a hand pressed flat against the wall from the other side. Her breath caught. For a moment, she thought she saw her aunt's face, not trapped, not pleading, but smiling. Then the light faded, and the wall was just a wall again. Clara exhaled, smiling through the ache in her chest. "Goodbye," she whispered. "Thank you." Outside, the sea answered in its language. One wave, then another, then another. On the ferry, the island receded into haze. The cliffs glowed briefly with the last light of day, a single flare of amber before the sun slipped below the horizon. Clara stood at the rail, wind in her hair, the taste of salt on her lips. In her pocket, the pearl of resin pulsed once, faint like a heartbeat, and then went still. She looked down at her reflection in the water for a heartbeat. Her eyes caught the glow, not gold this time, but a quiet silver, as if light itself had learned restraint. The reflection smiled back. The sea was breathing, and so was she. Chapter 11. The Return of the Tide. The ferry was almost empty. A few fishermen, half asleep on the benches, and an old woman knitting something the color of rain. The air smelled of diesel and wet salt. Clara stood at the stern, watching Villa Ambra recede into mist until it became a bruise of light on the horizon. She told herself she should feel relief. She was leaving. The island was at peace. But as the coastline blurred, she realized that peace was not absence. It was waiting. She touched the pocket of her coat, feeling the small lump of hardened resin, what was left of the pearl. It had stopped pulsing days ago, turned translucent, hollow. When she held it against the light, she could almost see through it. Almost. The ferry engine hummed a low, mechanical lullaby. The sky was flat, the sea unbroken. Yet something was wrong with the rhythm. The waves were too even, too deliberate, as if keeping time with something beneath them. She closed her eyes. The sound of the water became breathing again. Inhale, pause, exhale. The same pattern that had haunted her nights in the villa. 3 beats of life, and a silence between them wide enough to fall through. "Signorina?" The old woman's voice startled her. "You're pale. Sit, please." Clara smiled weakly and sat across from her. Just tired. The woman's hands never stopped moving, the knitting needles glinting with every shift of light. "You came from Ambra, yes? No one leaves in calm weather." Clara frowned. Why not? Because calm is what the island gives before it calls you back. Before Clara could respond, the ferry lurched. A subtle tilt, then a sharper one. Cups rattled on a nearby counter. One of the fishermen stood, muttering. The captain's voice shouted from above, "Hold steady!" Currents reversed. The old woman didn't even look up from her knitting. It calls. The deck tilted harder, forcing Clara to grip the railing. The sea, moments ago smooth as silk, now rippled in concentric circles radiating from the direction of the island. The ferry engine groaned, fighting the sudden pull. It was not a wave, not wind. It was suction, a tide turning against itself. From the horizon, the mist thickened, curling inward. In it, faint flashes of amber light pulsed like slow lightning beneath the water. Luca had once told her the island breathed with the sea. Now it was exhaling, and she was the only one it wanted back. The captain cut the engine. The vessel drifted, pulled by a force no one could name. "We're turning around," he shouted. "It's safer to ride it in." No one argued. The fishermen crossed themselves. The old woman's knitting stopped at last, and she looked at Clara with eyes too young for her face. "When it calls, you must answer kindly, or it will teach you another language." Clara didn't reply. She stood again at the stern. The island was reappearing, not closer, but clearer, as if distance meant nothing to it. She thought she saw movement along the cliffs. Light, perhaps, or a figure walking where no path existed. For a heartbeat, she imagined Léonie standing there, veil gone, arm raised in silent greeting. Then the ferry turned in full circle, surrendering to the pull. The engine whined, and they headed back toward Lyra's harbor. The sky broke open with a faint rain, not drops, but dust. Golden motes fell across the deck, melting on contact with the metal, leaving small amber stains. No one else seemed to notice. Clara held out her palm. The dust landed and vanished into her skin. A warmth spread through her hand, traveling up to her shoulder, her chest, her throat. She whispered, "Not again." By the time they docked, the entire harbor was under a strange hush. The air shimmered faintly, as if sun and rain had made a pact. People stood outside shops, staring out to sea. Children had stopped playing. Every few seconds, a ripple spread to the water in perfect rhythm. A fisherman ran toward the dock. "The tide," he shouted. "It's moving wrong. Out, then in, then out again." Clara stepped off the boat and felt the rhythm beneath her soles, like a slow heartbeat under the earth. The ground itself seemed to move. The old woman disembarked behind her, set down her knitting bag, and said quietly, "When the tide breathes both ways, something has lost its name." "What does that mean?" Clara asked, but the woman was already walking away, her figure vanishing into the crowd. By late afternoon, the weather had cleared. Luca found her in the square, sitting beneath the lemon trees, her face pale. "I heard," he said. "The currents turned you back." She nodded, barely lifting her gaze. "It wasn't the current." He sat beside her. "You felt again." "I think I never stopped." She opened her hand. "Look." The faint glow was back, threading under her skin. It came through the rain. Or the dust, whatever that was. Lucas stared at her palm, then at the horizon. Irina is still at the station. She picked up resonant spikes again, multiple points. Not just under the villa this time. Where? He hesitated. Everywhere around the island. She felt the words settle in her stomach like stones. "It's spreading." He nodded. "The pulse that once belonged to the sea. It's moving inland, into the rock, into the air. And maybe," she said softly, "into me." The clock tower struck 5. Each bell note seemed to hang longer than it should have. The echoes folding in on themselves until the air vibrated. Luca turned toward her, his expression a mix of fear and awe. "Clara, what if the veil isn't gone? What if it was never meant to be released, but to expand?" She met his eyes. "Then we need to find the rest of it." The wind shifted from the sea, carrying the faint smell of resin. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured, not in the sky, but deep below, like the world remembering to breathe. Chapter 12. The Letters of the Dead. The next morning broke clear, but hollow. The kind of light that felt borrowed. The island looked unchanged from the terrace. Olive groves brushed silver, the cove glittering below. Yet Clara felt the difference the way one feels the absence of sound after music stops. Something had moved beneath the surface of ordinary life, and it was still moving. She hadn't slept. The resin dust from the ferry had left a shimmer across her sheets, and each time she closed her eyes, the same image returned. The figure on the cliff, the raised hand, the whisper, return. Now, the word echoed faintly in her pulse. Luca arrived just after sunrise, carrying a thermos and a folded map. His expression was pale with the stubborn patience of a man pretending not to worry. Irina's reading spiked again last night, he said. Not random this time. Coordinated, like a sequence. Clara poured the coffee into chipped cups. You mean communication. He nodded. Or a signal. They drank in silence for a while, the sea stretching calm and deceitful beneath them. Then Luca unfolded the map. The 5 marks each circle were scattered like stars around the island, one near the harbor, one inland near the old monastery, one by the lighthouse, and 2 along the cliffs near Villa Ambra. Each point pulsed faintly in the corner of Clara's vision, though she knew the map was still. I think these are anchor points, she said, tracing a finger over the paper. Like the mark on the platform, B12. But if there are others, it means my family's work wasn't isolated here. Luca looked at her. Then the Institute existed. For real, she exhaled slowly. Yes, and I think the villa's hiding what's left of it. They began the search after breakfast. The house seemed to cooperate, the doors opening more easily than before, the air warmer, the silence less defensive. Still, Clara felt a faint hum beneath the floorboards, the pulse sinking to her steps. In the library, they started pulling books from the shelves. Luca was the first to find it, a narrow seam behind a row of antique volumes, where the wall met the corner. The plaster sounded hollow. He tapped again. Here. Clara fetched a chisel and hammer. The plaster cracked with a dry sigh, revealing a wooden panel beneath. Together, they pried it loose. Dust bloomed, and behind it yawned a small, dark room. She held the lamp inside. Stacks of paper lay bound with twine. Rolled blueprints leaned against the wall. The air was thick with the scent of resin and ink. This isn't just storage, Luca murmured. It's a record. On the far table sat a metal box, its lid corroded but intact. Clara brushed away the dust and found a single engraving across it, MI/Section 12. She opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed in the same looping handwriting. Emile Moreau, care of the Moreau Institute. Each one bore dates from the 1940s and 50s. Some were unopened, others had been read, so often the paper was thin at the folds. Clara lifted one at random and began to read aloud. April 14th, 1953, Marseille. My dear Emile, the transfer failed again. The resonance collapses as soon as the subject's heart stops. You were right. It requires breath, not memory. But the council grows impatient. They want permanence, something that outlives the body. I fear they will push for live anchors. I will not participate in that. I am coming home. L. Luca met her eyes. Léonie. Clara nodded slowly. She tried to stop him. She opened another. July 2nd, 1954. Villa Ambra. Emile, the experiment continues itself, even in your absence. The air here hums like the sea under glass. I hear them. The others. Each breath we take adds to the chorus. I think the island remembers us now. Perhaps that was your intention all along. If it is, then I am sorry. L. Clara closed the letter. She stayed. She became the anchor. And I. She swallowed. I inherited it. Luca leaned over the table, scanning the letters. There are more, he said, separating the stacks. Some were written by other hands, signed with initials. MDSVHR. The same phrase appeared again and again. Respiro Protocol. He opened one addressed to Section 12. Subject B, 12 stable. Integration complete. Pulse synchronized with host signature. Field radius expanding. Recommendation. Suspend replication until termination test confirmed. Luca looked up sharply. B12. That's you. Or Léonie, Clara said. Or whoever came before me. He read further, voice low. Termination test unsuccessful. Host persists beyond isolation period. Containment recommended. So she couldn't die, Clara whispered. Not until she found another host. Her mind raced back through everything. The phone calls, the painting breathing, the mark burning through her skin. Léonie's last words, the line unbroken. The letters rustled faintly, though neither of them moved. For a moment, the air inside the room shifted. Cooler, scented with salt. The lamp flickered. From the darkness of the corner came a faint sound, like a page turning itself. Clara turned slowly. A single sheet of paper had slid off the shelf, landing face up on the floor. It bore no letterhead, only a diagram. Concentric circles around a central figure, marked primary anchor, subject L11, secondary B12, and beneath that, in faint pencil, if the breath leave the vessel, the sea will rise to claim it. Luca's throat tightened. If you broke the cycle, the sea will take it back, Clara finished. Outside, thunder cracked. Not from the sky, from below. The floor trembled, shaking the dust loose from the ceiling. Books toppled from their shelves. Luca caught her arm. We need to get out. But Clara froze, staring at the letters. The ink on the open pages had begun to run, the words melting into each other as if the paper were bleeding amber. She grabbed one. Léonie's final letter, just before it dissolved. If you find this, it means the island has learned your name. Do not try to destroy the veil. It is older than breath, and it loves what it remembers. Then the words vanished, leaving only the outline of a hand pressed in resin. They stumbled out into the corridor as the wall behind them cracked. The wooden panel slammed shut with a force that shook the house. When the dust settled, the seam had sealed itself, smooth, unbroken, as if the hidden room had never existed. Luca leaned against the wall, breathing hard. That room. It's gone, Clara said. It doesn't want us there anymore. She opened her hand. The letter she had saved was still warm. The resin mark shimmered, faintly under the light, a print the size of her own palm. The island knows I've read them, she whispered, and now it remembers me again. Luca looked at her, his voice barely audible. What does it want from you? Clara turned toward the sea, through the window. The waves were rolling inward against the wind, defying the tide. Her answer was as steady as it was hopeless, to finish what they began. Chapter 13. The Amber Choir. For the rest of that day, the air over Lyra held a strange vibration, something between silence and music. It wasn't loud, not even audible in the ordinary sense, but every object seemed to hum faintly, like a glass tuned to an unseen frequency. Doors creaked in the same pitch. Windows shivered without wind. Even the sea appeared to move with a rhythm too exact to be coincidence. Clara felt it before she heard it. The island was singing. By evening, she and Luca had returned to Marine Station, where Irina stood surrounded by screens flickering with waves and light. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue, her gray hair pulled back in a loose braid that made her look both ageless and weary. I thought the instruments were broken, she said, gesturing toward a console that spat lines of shifting color across its screen. But no, it's data. Patterns, all harmonically related. The frequencies line up every 84 seconds, like before, only now they're stacked. 5 primary sources, sometimes 6. 6? Luca frowned. There were only 5 anchors on the map. I know. Irina leaned closer to the screen. That's the problem. The 6th source doesn't correspond to any geographical point. It's moving. She turned to Clara, her expression grave. It's moving with you. Clara's skin prickled. You're saying, I'm emitting this. Not you, exactly. Irina adjusted the sensors. More like something that's in sympathy with you. Like resonance between tuning forks. One starts to sing when the other is struck. Luca glanced at Clara's hands, where faint amber lines still glowed beneath the skin. It started after the fairy turned back. probably the moment she re-entered the island's field. Irina said, "You've been marked again, Clara." Clara sank into the nearest chair. I thought it was over. Endings are only things pretending to be beginnings. Irina said softly, almost kindly, "The veil doesn't forget. It just waits for a new breath." Night fell slowly, the horizon bruised violet. Outside the glass walls of the station, the water glowed faintly, not from reflection but from within, pockets of bioluminescence pulsing in exact sync with the readouts. The effect was hypnotic. The entire cove breathed. Irina poured tea into paper cups and set one beside Clara. When I ran spectral analysis on the pulses, she said, "I found overtones, frequencies too complex for any single source. It's not just the island anymore." "What do you mean?" Luca asked. "The signals are repeating elsewhere. Other coasts, other seas." She unfolded a printed map covered in dotted points. Tunis, Marseille, Dubrovnik, even a faint echo near the Azores. Luca exhaled slowly. "That's impossible." "Not impossible," Irina corrected. "Connected?" Clara's hands tightened around her cup. "You think the veil is spreading?" "I think it was never meant to stay in one place," Irina said. "The Moreau Institute might have awakened something far older than they understood. A living memory that travels through resonance, like a choir that adds a new voice each time someone listens." Clara stood and walked toward the window. The sea beyond the glass was a sheet of living amber. Schools of fish moved like notes along a staff, their scales reflecting light from beneath. The sight filled her with both wonder and dread. Then, "I'm not the only one hearing it." "No," Irina said quietly, "and that's what frightens me." That night, Clara couldn't return to the villa. The storm warnings had returned, and Luca insisted she stay at the station. She lay awake on the narrow cot in the back room, the hum of the equipment blending with the sea's pulse. Sleep came and went like the tide, each dream blurred by sound. She dreamed of corridors made of water, lined with mirrors that sang in whispers. Each mirror showed a different woman, one in Marseille painting in golds, one on a Greek island playing violin to an empty sea, one beneath a lighthouse writing symbols in sand before the waves erased them. Each woman had the same faint glow under her skin. When she woke, the room still trembled with a low tone. Luca was asleep at his desk, head on his folded arms. Irina stood by the door, backlit by the dull orange of dawn. She was staring out toward the horizon. Clara joined her. The sea was calm again, deceptively still. "What do you see?" she asked. "Light," Irina said. "Too far away to be ships, too steady to be lightning." Clara followed her gaze. Along the distant curve of the sea, 5 distinct flares of amber blinked one after another, like beacons calling to each other. "The anchors," Clara whispered. "Or the choir," Irina murmured, each singing its part. They watched in silence as the lights pulsed, then dimmed one by one, until only the island's own glow remained. Later, Clara returned to the villa with Luca. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with petrichor and the sweet scent of citrus. Inside, the house felt alive again, the faint creak of wood, the rhythmic sigh of the walls adjusting to temperature. She went directly to the study. The wall where the painting had once hung was smooth and bare, but the light coming to the shutters fell in golden bands that seemed almost deliberate. She knelt by the floor and brushed her hand along the boards. The faint warmth was still there. "There's something underneath," she said. Together they pried up one plank, then another. Beneath the floorboards lay a small chest sealed with amber wax. The seal bore the Moreau crest, a stylized lung shaped like an infinity symbol. Inside, wrapped in linen that had turned the color of dust, were notebooks, dozens of them, some labeled with letters and numbers. B03, B07, L11. Others bore only names. Marina, Sophia, Eleni, Nor. Each one contained fragments of writing, equations, sketches, even pieces of cloth stained with what looked like pigment. But what caught Clara's attention was a final notebook, smaller than the rest, bound in dark leather and tied with blue ribbon. She untied it carefully and opened the first page. To the next voice who listens. If you are reading this, the veil has found you. You will hear it first in the sea, then in the bones, then in the breath. Do not fear the sound. It is only memory trying to live again. L. Léonie's handwriting. But the date at the top made Clara's pulse stop. December 2023. Luca stared. That's impossible. Clara flipped the page. The ink was fresh, not faded. The second entry read, I'm still here, not in the way you think. The island keeps the sound of who we were. Every breath we take adds to the choir. Listen for me in the next storm. She ran her fingers over the ink. It smudged slightly, still wet. Luca's voice was low. She's writing to you. Clara closed the book, pressing it to her chest. No, she's writing through me. The light in the study shifted, a subtle flicker that brushed across the walls, then the ceiling, as if the house had exhaled. The sea outside answer was single, deep pulse that rattled the windows. Then silence. Clara turned to Luca, her eyes reflecting the faint gold of the morning. It's starting again. That night, as wind coiled around the villa like breath, Clara sat at her desk with Léonie's notebook open before her. The pages whispered faintly, though she hadn't moved them. When she picked up her pen, her hand trembled. She wasn't sure she was writing or being written through. Her hand moved anyway, the ink flowing without hesitation. The choir grows. The sea remembers. And soon, the breath will travel beyond islands. She dropped the pen. The ink shimmered, not black, but amber. It pulsed once, twice, then dried into silence. From somewhere below the villa came a faint sound, like 100 voices inhaling at once. Clara closed her eyes and listened. The amber choir had begun. Chapter 14. The Archive of Echoes. The rain returned before dawn, soft and deliberate, like fingers testing the roof tiles for weakness. Clara woke to its rhythm. She had fallen asleep at the desk again. Léonie's last notebook opened beside her. A candle burned down to a circle of gold wax. The ink on the final line still shimmered faintly. The breath will travel beyond islands. She turned the page and found a sketch delicate, almost architectural, of a building shaped like a spiral shell. Underneath, Léonie had written 2 words, Institute Moreau, Marseille. The sight hit her with a shiver that felt both inherited and new. Her grandfather's city, the place where all of it had started. By mid-morning, she and Luca were sitting on the floor of the study, surrounded by notebooks and open folders. The air smelled of dust and salt and the faint sweetness of old ink. Irina sat cross-legged beside them, holding a magnifying lens over a yellow blueprint. Look at this. It's not just an observatory. It's an acoustic structure. The walls were designed to vibrate at specific frequencies. See the annotations? Resonance chamber, 72 hertz. Clara traced the spiral pattern with her fingertip, a building that breathes. Exactly, Irina said. They weren't measuring the sea. They were teaching it to speak. Luca leaned back against the wall, rubbing his eyes, and they succeeded. That's what the veil is, a residual voice. Clara nodded slowly. And now it wants to be whole again. They spread the documents into rough chronology. Letters from the 1930s describe the Institute's founding. Emile Moreau's vision of sound as a vessel for memory. A decade later came the research journals, experiments in subsonic vibration, marine biology, and pigment resonance. The veil had begun as a scientific curiosity, a mixture of amber dust and oil that could retain vibrational energy like a recording surface. But then the notes changed. The language grew theological. The material responds to presence. When the painter breathes, the pigment remembers. Each tone leaves a trace that cannot die. Another entry, written in a hand trembling with excitement. 11 shows complete synchronization. Her heart rate matches the tidal cycles to within 1 second. Subject stable. Subject aware. Luca stared at the initials. L11. That's Léonie. Irina nodded grimly. She was an assistant. She was the experiment. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Thunder rolled beyond the cliffs while the 3 of them worked in near silence, their voices replaced by the soft rustle of pages and the ticking of the clock that refused to keep normal time. At one point, Clara realized that every sound in the room, pen scratching, cup settling, even breath, seemed to fall into a slow, measured rhythm. 84 seconds again, the interval that ruled them all. She found another folder labeled Field Notes. B, 12. Her throat went dry. Inside were diagrams of the island, pulse graphs, and a hand-drawn chart linking names and numbers. The last entry was dated the year of her birth. Transference successful. Host unaware. Bloodline secure. Her hands began to shake. He knew, she whispered. Emile knew it would pass through generations. Luca looked up sharply. You mean? Yes. She met his eyes. I was born carrying it. The storm hit at dusk. Wind howled down the chimney. Rain lashed the shutters until they banged like doors demanding to be opened. Irina retreated to the kitchen to secure the instruments. Luca moved to the windows. Clara stayed among the papers, unable to look away from the final blueprint. The spiral structure of the Institute, half laboratory, half chapel. She saw the mark again. Infinity, the symbol of lungs of infinity, a breath looping upon itself. A note beneath it read, when the two halves of the breath reunite, the air will speak its true name. She felt something stir deep inside her chest. Not pain, not fear, but recognition. The veil had never been a wall. It was a mouth waiting for language. Hours later, when the storm calmed, Clara lit another candle and read the next section of Léonie's notebook aloud. It was a fragment of a diary, dated years after the Institute's closure. Marseille was the first to drown without water. The sounds never stopped there. They hid under the trams, the bells, the heartbeat of the city. I brought the last sample home to the island, thinking I could bury it in salt. But the sea listens. It always listens. If anyone finds this, know that the veil is not a curse. It is our inheritance. We taught the air to remember. Now it remembers us. She lowered the book slowly. Léonie wasn't just protecting the island, she said. She was protecting everyone else from it. Luca frowned. Then what happens if the veil spreads? Then it learns the language of everything. Irina's gaze met hers across the candlelight. And what does it say, Clara? Clara's answer was a whisper. Us. Later, when the others slept, she remained awake, surrounded by the scattered pages. The candle burned low. The sound of rain softened into the rhythm she knew too well. 3 slow breaths and silence. She closed her eyes. The hum became voices, distant, layered, almost melodic. Léonie's among them, and others she didn't know. Male, female, young, ancient. Not words exactly, but vowels and sighs that folded into each other, weaving harmony out of memory. The Amber Choir was not only the sea. It was the sum of every life that had ever breathed near it. Clara opened her eyes and whispered to the empty room. If the veil remembers us, then maybe we can remember it. The candle flickered, a single drop of wax sliding down like a tear. Outside, lightning cut the sky over the sea, a silent flash of gold. For a heartbeat, it illuminated the horizon where something vast and luminous stirred beneath the water, too symmetrical to be a wave. Then darkness again and the low, steady breath of the island continuing. Not louder this time, but nearer, as if it had moved inside the walls to listen more closely. Nothing slept anymore on Villa Ambra. Chapter 15. The Man Who Painted the Sea. The road that left the harbor wound inland through a landscape of olive groves and limestone terraces. The air smelled of rosemary and iron, of old rain trapped in rock. Clara sat in the passenger seat of Luca's Jeep, watching the sea vanish behind them in the rear-view mirror. Each turn of the wheels felt like a slow unthreading of certainty. They had left Irina at the station with the promise of updates, though none of them believed the equipment would explain what was happening. What Clara carried now wasn't data. It was inheritance. In the back seat, Léonie's notebook shifted softly with each bend in the road, whispering like thin breaths. The monastery isn't far, Luca said, eyes fixed on the serpentine path ahead. The locals call it Santuario del Silenzio. It's been abandoned for decades. Some of the letters mentioned Étienne visiting it before the Institute closed. Clara looked out at the landscape. Hills rose in quiet folds, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional stone cross. He was the one who started it all, wasn't he? The idea of painting sound. Emile made it science, Luca said, but Étienne made it belief. They reached the monastery at noon. The building crouched on the edge of a ravine, its arches broken, and its bell tower leaning like a man listening too closely. Ivy had claimed most of the facade, spilling over old frescoes now ghost pale from weather. The gate was open, swinging gently in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with silence, not the ordinary kind, but silence that felt inhabited. Clara stepped across the threshold and stopped. The temperature dropped. The sound of her own breath echoed strangely, as if the air had texture. Luca followed with the flashlight. Careful. The floorboards. The beam caught a wall at the far end of the nave. A fresco covered it from floor to ceiling. Faded, fragmented, but unmistakable in style. The pigments glowed faintly, their colors muted to honey and bone. In the center, a figure stood before a sea rendered in shifting gold, its surface rippling as a still wet. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. He painted this. H.M. Moreau's signature marked the bottom corner. A looping yam entwined with symbols she had seen before. The infinity of lungs, the loop of breath. She approached, fingers trembling. The pigment shimmered at her nearness, not reflecting the light, but responding to it. "It's alive," she murmured, "just like the veil." Luca examined the lower section. "Look here, these lines on the varnish. They're not decoration. They're notes, musical notation." She crouched beside him. The symbols were primitive, a fusion of geometry and sound, carved into wet plaster before the paint had dried. He was transcribing frequencies, she said, trying to capture the tone of the sea. Luca's gaze followed the lines upward, toward the face of a figure standing before the water. The features were indistinct, almost erased, but in the shifting light, they rearranged themselves subtly, forming expressions that didn't belong to any one person. "Who is she?" he asked. Clara swallowed. "Not who. What?" They moved deeper into the monastery. Each corridor smelled of dust and cedar. Cells lined the walls, some collapsed, others sealed with wooden boards. In one of the rooms, they found a table covered in glass jars. Inside each, flecks of dried pigment suspended in resin amber dark. Every jar bore a label: Voice 1, Voice 2, Voice 3, up to Voice 17. "Samples," Luca said softly, "like the choir Irina recorded." Clara unscrewed one of the lids. The smell that escaped was faintly sweet, like honey left too long in sunlight. "It's still active," she whispered, "even after all these years." On a nearby shelf lay a journal bound in rough parchment. She opened it and read the first page. The handwriting was slanted and fervent. Étienne's, she guessed. "The sea does not sing alone. It borrows our voices. Each wave carries an echo of every breath it has ever touched. When I paint, the pigment hums. When I sleep, I hear the choir in the deep. Léonie says we should stop. But she does not understand. The veil is not a prison. It is a promise. When my brush moves, the world answers. I have seen the shape of sound. It is a circle." Clara turned another page. Sketches filled the margins, diagrams of lungs, of rippling waves, of human figures dissolving into water. In the final pages, the writing grew erratic, the lines slanting upward. "I have begun the great canvas beneath the chapel. The sea will complete it for me. When it does, the breath will no longer need names." She looked up at Luca. He wasn't just painting the sea. He was using it. "Then the question is, for what?" They followed a narrow staircase spiraling down from the chapel's rear. The steps were slick, the air damp. The walls glowed faintly, not from light, but from minerals embedded in the stone. Thin veins of amber tracing their descent. At the bottom waited a wooden door, half-rotted but still locked with a heavy latch. Luca forced it open, the hinges screaming in protest. The chamber beyond was half-flooded. Water pooled across the floor, dark and still. The air smelled of salt and resin. And there, stretching along the far wall, was another painting, massive, unfinished. It showed a horizon, sea meeting sky, both painted with swirling bands of gold and bronze. In the center, a circle blazed, a sun, or perhaps an opening through which faint shapes seemed to move. Hands, Faces, breath itself made visible. The pigments pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly. "This is it," Clara said. "The first veil." Lucas stepped closer, shining the light along the edges. Beneath the paint, a texture rippled. Layers so thin they might have been skin. He mixed the pigments with something organic. "Amber dust, yes," Clara said. "But also," she hesitated, "blood." She remembered a line from Léonie's notes. Each layer must carry the heartbeat of the one who paints it. Étienne had poured himself into his art literally, fusing his body into the resonance. A man turned pigment, a breath made eternal. She ran her fingers just above the surface, not daring to touch. The hum beneath the paint answered her presence. For a second she saw movement, a figure half visible within the circle, hands pressed against the inner surface of the veil as though trapped behind glass. She stumbled backward. "It's him," she whispered. "Étienne." Luca caught her arm. "Alive?" "Not alive. Remembered." The water at their feet began to stir, rippling outward from the base of the painting. Tiny flecks of light rose like fireflies, coalescing into faint threads of sound that vibrated through the chamber. "Do you hear that?" she said. Luca nodded slowly. "He's still painting." They fled the monastery as thunder rolled over the hills. Outside, the light had gone amber-gray, the air heavy with the scent of the sea, though the coast lay miles away. From the doorway, Clara looked back once more. Through the broken windows of the chapel, she could see the faint glow of the fresco inside, pulsing like a heartbeat. "You think he finished it?" she asked. Luca shook his head. If he had, none of this would still be waking up. Clara turned toward the horizon, then were walking into his unfinished dream. That night, back at the villa, she couldn't sleep. She dreamed of Étienne standing knee-deep in a sea of liquid gold, brush in hand, painting the horizon as it unfolded in real time. Each stroke sang. Each breath rippled across the water until the sea itself became canvas. When he turned to look at her, his eyes were the color of resin, and his voice was both hers and Léonie's. "You see now," he said, "art and breath are the same. Both must move or they die." She woke gasping, the scent of turpentine and salt thick in the air. The window rattled. Outside, the tide was higher than she had ever seen it, licking the base of the cliffs like something reclaiming its name. Clara pressed her hand to the glass and whispered, "Tell me what you want." From below came the faintest answer, almost human. "Finish the canvas." And somewhere in the dark house, the old easel Léonie had left in the study creaked once, as though remembering the sound of a brush returning to work. Chapter 16. The Painting Without a Name. The night drew its breath like a lung before the storm. Clouds crawled over the hills, heavy with thunder, and the sea below Villa Ambra glittered with the unnatural stillness that came before rain. Clara sat at her desk with the lamp off, the only light the slow pulse of lightning beyond the window. In front of her, Léonie's last notebook lay open at a page she had read 100 times. The unfinished canvas is the most dangerous. What is not named cannot sleep. The words had changed since yesterday. Below them, in ink that hadn't been there before, a new line had appeared. "He waits where the sea breathes inland." She didn't need to ask who he was. By the time she reached the jeep, the storm had begun. The rain was thin at first, more mist than water, but it carried the taste of metal, as if it had passed through something alive before falling. She drove without music, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. The monastery loomed from the fog like a half-remembered thought. Lightning flared, and for a heartbeat the windows glowed from within. She told herself it was reflection. She didn't believe it. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, deliberate intervals, one drop every 5 seconds, perfectly timed, like the breath of a sleeping giant. Her footsteps echoed as she crossed the nave toward the stairs that led to the underground chamber. The moment she descended, the hum began. It started low, a vibration in her bones. Then came the tone, the same pitch she'd heard on the island, the same pulse as her heartbeat. By the time she reached the door, the air was trembling. The chamber was no longer flooded. The floor was dry, and the unfinished painting glowed faintly in the dark, its surface alive with motion. Gold and bronze currents shifted beneath the varnish, as though the sea inside the image had begun to move again. She stepped closer. The circle in the center, once dull and incomplete, now shone with an inner light. Faint shapes moved within, hands, eyes, fragments of faces pressing against the inner surface. The painting was no longer static. It was breathing. "Étienne," she whispered. "Can you hear me?" The air thickened. A voice rose, not in words but in the language of waves, a sound that felt like memory becoming flesh. The figure within the light turned. Its features shifted, resolving into something almost human. A man's face, younger than she expected, eyes bright with exhaustion and devotion. When he spoke, his lips didn't move. The sound came from everywhere at once. "I painted the world as I saw it, and it painted me in return." Clara froze. "You're alive in there." Alive is a word for those who forget they're remembered. Lightning flared through the cracks in the ceiling. The chamber filled with a golden pulse. For an instant, she saw him clearly. Étienne standing knee-deep in water that was also light, holding a brush that melted and reformed with every movement. "The veil is unfinished," he said. "You carry the breath that must complete it." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "I don't understand." "You are its echo. The blood remembers. When the final line is drawn, the two halves will hear each other again." The light inside the painting flickered, revealing a second silhouette beside him. Léonie. Her eyes were calm, her hand resting against the inside of the circle as though to steady him. "We thought we could silence the sea." Léonie's voice said, layered with her own. "But the sea is the only thing that remembers us long enough to forgive." Clara reached out, her fingers hovering an inch above the surface. The paint rippled outward, cool and soft as breath. It did not resist her. It invited. "Clara." The shout broke through the hum. She turned. Luca was at the top of the stairs, soaked and pale, flashlight trembling in his hand. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, breathless. "The sensors, they went mad. The readings are off the scale." "Look," she said. He aimed the light at the canvas and froze. "My God!" The painting moved. The entire surface undulated like skin under wind. Faces flickered within, dozens, hundreds, men, women, children, all exhaling in rhythm. The sound was low, harmonic, terrifyingly beautiful. "The choir," Clara said. "They're all in there." Luca took a step forward. "If they're alive, they're remembered," she said. "And they want me to finish what Étienne began." A gust of wind slammed through the chamber. The door above banged shut, trapping them in the half-dark. The light from the painting brightened until the air itself glowed. The hum deepened, vibrating in their chests, in their teeth, in the water still seeping between the stones. "Clara," Luca shouted over the sound. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. She had already reached for the brush lying on the floor, a relic, its bristles hardened with gold pigment, its handle etched with Étienne's initials. Her hand closed around it, and warmth surged through her arm, up her spine, until her vision blurred with light. "Étienne," she whispered, "show me." The circle on the canvas widened, the air filled with the scent of resin and salt. She raised the brush, and her hand began to move on its own, tracing invisible lines across the surface. Each stroke sang, a tone that joined the others in perfect pitch. Luca grabbed her shoulder. "Stop. You don't know what it's doing to you." But she couldn't stop. The strokes became faster, merging into spirals that echoed the shape of lungs of infinity, of tides. The painting responded, layers shifting until the boundary between pigment and air dissolved. The glow reached the ceiling, crawling across the stones like veins of light. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went still. Clara staggered backward, the brush clattering to the floor. The painting was silent again. Only one difference remained. The circle at its center was no longer empty. It held a reflection, not Étienne, not Léonie, but her. She saw herself standing within the veil, eyes open, surrounded by gold. Luca turned to her, horrified. "Clara, your hands." She looked down. The amber veins beneath her skin burned brighter than ever, tracing every line of her palms, her wrists, her throat. The glow pulsed once, twice, then dimmed, settling into a steady rhythm. "I finished it," she said quietly. The painting shimmered, faintly alive, like a tide caught between breaths. Étienne's voice came one last time, soft as the whisper of the sea. "A canvas never ends. It only changes hands." The glow faded. The chamber sank back into shadow. They drove back to the villa in silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and unreal. The first light of dawn crawled over the horizon, turning the wet roads into rivers of silver. When they reached the terrace, the air over the sea pulsed once, a single golden breath, and then stilled. Clara stood there, soaked and shaking, staring at the horizon. The brush was still in her hand. The bristles glowed faintly in the gray light. Luca touched her shoulder. "What happens now?" She didn't answer right away. Her pulse was slow, measured, like the islands. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a calm that wasn't entirely her own. "Now," she said, "the veil begins to paint back." Chapter 17. The hollow between heartbeats. The disappearance took less than a breath. One moment. Clara stood on the terrace, the sea stretching out before her like a page of unwritten light. The next, the air folded inward, a subtle collapse, a shift in density. And she was gone. Luca felt it before he saw it. A pull, a pressure, and then silence so sudden it left his ears ringing. The brush fell from her hand and clattered onto the stones. Where she had been, a faint shimmer hung in the air. Not light, not shadow, but something between. When he reached for it, it dissolved and the terrace was empty. Clara opened her eyes to the sound of waves. Not the ordinary rhythm of surf, but a deeper pulse, slow, deliberate, the breathing of the sea itself. She was lying on the floor of Villa Ambra, or something that resembled it. The walls glowed faintly, as though made of glass filled with liquid gold. Every surface rippled softly, as if reflecting an unseen current. Furniture floated inches above the ground, suspended in a gravity that had forgotten its purpose. Her own body felt weightless, as though each heartbeat risked carrying her upward. She rose slowly. Her footsteps made no sound. The air was thick, fluid. She could see dust motes moving through it like plankton suspended in sunlight. When she spoke, her voice echoed from every direction. "Hello." No answer, only the hum, the same tone that had haunted her dreams for weeks, now clearer, closer, almost human. She walked down the corridor. The paintings on the walls were no longer still. Each canvas shimmered faintly, showing moving scenes. People walking, faces turning, mouths forming words she couldn't hear. Some were strangers. Others were fragments of memory. Léonie by the cove, Étienne at his easel, herself as a child tracing shells in wet sand. Every painting exhaled a thin thread of light that drifted toward the ceiling and vanished. It wasn't a house anymore. It was a lung made of memory, breathing her name. When she reached the study, she stopped. The wall where the original painting had hung was gone. In its place was an open archway, leading into what should have been the cliff beyond, but instead open onto a vast expanse of water glowing from below. The sea hung suspended, neither above nor below, stretching into infinity. Its surface rippled with golden veins that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Something moved within it. At first, only shadows, vague shapes drifting slowly, like fish made of light. Then faces. Dozens. Hundreds. They looked at her as if expecting something. A whisper rippled through the chamber. Between one breath and the next, she turned. Léonie stood behind her, clothed in the same amber light as the sea. Her face was calm, ageless, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and pride. "You shouldn't be here yet," Léonie said. "I didn't choose it," Clara whispered. "It pulled me in." Her aunt smiled faintly. "It always does. The veil is curious. It listens to those who listen back." Clara took a step forward. "Is this death?" "No," Léonie reached out, her hand passing through Clara's arm like smoke. "This is the space where life inhales before remembering itself. A hollow between heartbeats." They walked together through the mirrored hall. The air hummed with tones that resonated inside Clara's chest. Each note carried fragments of words, pieces of thought from other lives, overlapping, building a pattern that felt like meaning just out of reach. "What did you mean?" Clara asked. "When you said the veil isn't a curse?" Léonie looked at her with quiet tenderness. "Because it remembers with love. Every echo, every breath, even our mistakes. We try to silence it because we feared what it knew of us. But the veil never punishes. It only mirrors. Then why did you trap yourself in it?" Léonie paused. Someone had to hold the silence until another could learn to hear. Clara stopped walking. "Me?" "Yes." Leonie's voice softened. "You were born with a breath already in you. We call it inheritance, but it's more than that. It's empathy. The island chose you because you could listen without wanting to own the sound." A faint vibration passed through the floor, the rhythm shifting, slowing. Léonie turned her head slightly, as if hearing a distant signal. "The surface is fading. You're being pulled back." Clara's pulse quickened. "Back to Luca, back to the unfinished breath. You haven't completed it yet." She looked down at her hands. The amber veins were blazing now, tracing every nerve in light. "What do I have to do?" "Give it what it seeks," Léonie said. Not a voice, understanding. "It's not the sea that's trapped here. It's memory. The moment the world forgot how to listen." Clara frowned. "How?" Léonie smiled, and in that smile was the same peace Clara had seen in her final photograph. "By forgiving what you inherited." The air thickened. The sea beyond the arch began to churn, the golden light deepening to copper. Waves rose but didn't fall. They hung in suspension, forming spirals that closed in on themselves. From within the water, a sound grew, low, rhythmic, like 1,000 heartbeats aligning. Léonie placed a hand over Clara's heart. "When it calls, don't answer with fear. Just breathe." The world fractured. Light broke through the floor like molten glass. The sea burst upward, surrounding her in a cocoon of sound. The hum turned into music, choral, wordless, endless. Faces and memories spun past her in ribbons of light. Étienne painting, Irina adjusting dials, Luca laughing in the sunlight, a child running along the cliff edge. Each face opened its mouth in the same silent word. "Breathe." Clara gasped, and the air rushed back into her lungs with the force of a wave. Her vision went white. Luca found her lying on the terrace at dawn. The sky was bruised with the last color of the storm. Her pulse was slow but steady, her skin cold to the touch. The amber glow under her veins had faded, leaving only faint lines like healed scars. When her eyes opened, they were no longer gold but pale, almost translucent, as if reflecting the sky itself. He knelt beside her. "Clara, can you hear me?" She smiled weakly. "I was listening." "To what?" She looked past him toward the horizon, where the sea was perfectly still, to everything between heartbeats. Later that morning, as the sun climbed, Irina arrived breathless from the station. "The reading spiked again last night," she said. "We thought the sensors were malfunctioning, but—" She stopped when she saw Clara sitting up, wrapped in a blanket, hair still damp with seawater. "What happened?" Irina asked. Clara's answer was quiet, but it carried through the air like a tide turning. "I found the silence that keeps the world alive." That night, while the island slept, Clara stood once more on the terrace. The sea breathed gently against the cliffs, each wave smaller than the last. The stars above looked brighter than she remembered. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and for the first time in her life, the rhythm of her pulse matched the rhythm of the sea. No longer bound, no longer foreign. The veil was still there, she knew, just beyond the reach of sound. But it was no longer a prison. It was a mirror finally full, and in that quiet, the island exhaled. Chapter 18. The Breath of Two Worlds. The morning after her return was too quiet. No wind, no insects, not even the distant sound of the sea. The air had gone still, the kind of stillness that comes before revelation or ruin. Clara stood barefoot on the terrace, watching the horizon. The world seemed paused, the sky caught between blue and gray, the sun hesitant to rise. Every color looked faded, as if the island itself were holding its breath. Behind her, The villa murmured faintly, wood and stone shifting with a tide of unseen energy. The amber veins that had vanished from her skin had reappeared faintly under morning light, tracing delicate patterns up her arms. They didn't pulse anymore. They waited. Luca emerged from the doorway, hair damp, clothes wrinkled from a night without sleep. "You've been out here for hours." "I don't feel time anymore," she said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "It stretches like the tide." He stepped beside her. "Irina says the readings are unstable. Whatever happened last night, it changed the pattern. The island's pulse isn't just under the sea now. It's everywhere. In the air, the cliffs, even the house." Clara nodded. "It's merging." "With what?" She turned to face him. "With me." Inside, Irina had transformed the villa's kitchen into a temporary lab. Instruments flickered. Notebooks covered every surface. Cables ran like roots across the floor. She glanced up as they entered. "I've been up all night," she said. "The energy field is expanding outward in concentric waves. At this rate, it'll reach the mainland by tomorrow night." "What happens if it does?" Luca asked. Irina hesitated. "We don't know. If it's harmonic, it could dissipate. If it's parasitic," she didn't finish. Clara picked up one of the graphs. The peaks rose in even intervals, forming the same rhythm she had seen on the island weeks before. "This isn't random. It's breathing in cycles." Irina rubbed her temples. "Maybe, but what is it breathing for?" Clara looked out the window at the still sea. To remember, that night, she dreamed again. The island stretched below her like a living map. The villa a small organ within a greater body. Each cave, each tree, each grain of sand pulsed faintly with light. Above it all hung the veil, vast, golden, moving like fabric underwater. She saw Léonie's face within it, serene. Étienne's beside her, eyes open now. "You brought us breath," Léonie said. "But now the world must choose what to do with it." Clara tried to speak, but her voice came as wind through reeds. "If you let the veil close," Étienne said, "memory will fade. The island will sleep, and we will finally rest." Léonie's voice overlapped his. "If you keep it open, the world will remember too much. Every sorrow, every echo. It will drown in its own past." "And if I do nothing?" she asked. "Then both will suffocate." The dream dissolved into light, and she woke gasping, heart pounding. Her hands glowed again, brighter this time, the veins spreading across her skin like branches of molten gold. Luca found her at the edge of the cliffs before sunrise, the brush from Étienne's studio in her hand. "What are you doing?" he asked. She didn't look away from the sea. "Finishing what he started." "Clara, stop. You're not him. You can't control this." "I don't want to control it." She stepped closer to the edge, her hair whipping in the wind. "I want to free it." The sea below was no longer blue. It shimmered with layers of gold and bronze, as if light itself had become liquid. The sound of waves was gone, replaced by a low hum, steady and endless, the same pitch as her heartbeat. Luca grabbed her wrist. "If you open it again, you might not come back." She turned, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes. Not fear, but quiet acceptance that terrified him. Maybe I was never meant to stay. By mid-morning, the first tremors began. The island shook gently at first, then harder, as though exhaling after centuries of restraint. The villagers fled toward the harbor, shouting prayers and names. The sea withdrew, bearing black rocks and glimmering sand. In the villa, instruments shattered, books fell, and the air itself began to vibrate. Irina clung to the table. "She's doing it. She's merging the two frequencies." Luca ran toward the cliffs. The wind had become a living thing, circling the island in spirals of golden mist. He could barely see her, a silhouette standing on the edge, hair lifted like flame, the brush raised to the sky. "Clara!" he shouted, though his voice was lost in the roar. She turned to him once, smiling faintly. Then she stepped forward, not into the void, but into light. The air split open. There was no up, no down, only motion. Clara found herself suspended between two worlds, the sea above her, the sky below. The veil stretched around her, endless, luminous, woven of memory. Within it moved every life the island had ever held. Léonie, Étienne, nameless figures whose voices merged into one harmonic breath. She felt the pull from both sides. The world above wanted her to return. The world below wanted her to remain. And in the center, the veil waited, unspoken, expectant. She thought of Luca's hands, warm and real. She thought of Irina's weary smile. She thought of the island breathing in her chest. Then she spoke, not aloud, but through every pulse of her being. If memory must live, let it live gently. If the world must forget, let it forget without pain. The veil shuddered. Light burst outward in a slow explosion, rippling across the sea and the sky. Every wave froze for an instant, suspended mid-crest, then melted into silence. The hum faded. Clara closed her eyes. Her last thought before everything dissolved was simple, weightless, infinite. Between worlds, breath is just love remembering its shape. When the light receded, the island stood quiet again. Luca found her lying at the base of the cliffs, half submerged in shallow water. She was breathing, barely. Irina knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to Clara's wrist. Her pulse. Slow, Luca said. But there. They carried her back to the villa. The moment they crossed the threshold, the air inside shifted. Warm, still, alive. The house sighed once, like a body relieved. All around them, the golden veins that had covered the walls dimmed and vanished, absorbed into the stone. The hum was gone. Irina looked around. She closed it. Luca brushed a wet strand of hair from Clara's face. "No," he whispered. She balanced it. He could feel in the air a peace the island had never known. The breath had not died. It had simply learned to rest. That evening, as the sky turned violet, the 3 of them sat on the terrace in silence. The sea was calm. The horizon shimmered faintly, but only with sunlight now. Irina raised a glass of wine. To the girl who taught the world how to breathe again. Luca smiled, though his eyes stayed on Clara, still asleep in the chair beside him. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of the tide. Perfectly even, perfectly human. And far out at sea, where the sun met the water, a single ripple moved against the wind, as if the world itself had exhaled softly in gratitude. Chapter 19. The Amber Heart. The first thing Clara heard was the sea, not its surface chatter, not the crash of waves, but the low, steady pulse beneath everything, the heartbeat of water against stone. It was softer now, human, almost tender. When she opened her eyes, light filled the room. Real light. Sunlight filtered through open shutters. The smell of salt and lemon drifted in from the garden. She lay in her bed at Villa Ambra, the linen cool against her skin, her body heavy but warm. Someone had opened all the windows. The curtains swayed slowly in the morning breeze, and for the first time in weeks, she heard birds. "Welcome back," said a voice. Luca sat in the chair beside her, unshaven, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. He smiled, but it was a smile that trembled at the edges. "You were gone for 2 days." Clara blinked slowly. 2 days, she repeated. "I thought it was longer. It felt like it." He reached for her wrist, finding her pulse. Steady, slow but steady. She looked at their hands, his skin tanned, hers pale and faintly luminous. The veins beneath her skin no longer glowed gold. They had settled into a faint, opalescent shimmer, as if light lived in her blood but no longer burned. "I thought I died," she whispered. "So did I," he said softly. "But I think you did something harder. You came back." Later that morning, Irina arrived with coffee and sunlight. She was smiling, but her hand shook slightly as she poured. "You have no idea how close this island came to disappearing," she said. "The readings went mad, then flatlined. Total silence. I thought we'd lost everything." "Silence isn't death," Clara said. "Sometimes it's peace." Irina looked at her for a long moment. "You sound like Léonie." Clara smiled faintly. Maybe she's still speaking through me. Irina pulled up a chair. "You should see this." She unfolded a satellite printout, marked with concentric circles radiating from the island's center. When the light wave hit, it didn't destroy anything. It restructured. The ocean current shifted just slightly. Now they form a spiral, moving outward in perfect symmetry. The whole region's tides are stabilizing. Even the magnetic readings have harmonized. Luca leaned over the map. You're saying the veil changed the sea. I'm saying it healed it. Irina said, whatever Clara did, she balanced the frequencies. Clara sipped her coffee, the warmth grounding her. Then it worked. Irina nodded slowly. Yes, but it cost you something. Clara glanced down at her hands again. It always does. The day unfolded gently. Luca stayed close, half guardian, half companion. The island felt lighter, the air no longer charged with unseen tension. When they walked along the cliffs that afternoon, the sea glittered a color she had never seen before. Not blue, not green, but something between. The villagers waved at them from the road. The tide listens again, one old fisherman shouted, laughing. It comes and goes like it should. She smiled, though she didn't quite know what to answer. They reached the cove at sunset. The water there was shallow, clear enough to see the sand rippling below. The brass ring that had once opened the secret stairway still sat embedded in the rock. Clara knelt beside it. It was cold now, inert. But when she pressed her palm against the stone, she felt a faint vibration, not power, but memory. Luca crouched beside her. You feel it too. She nodded. It's still breathing, just quieter, like a heart that's finally healed. Clara smiled. Exactly. That evening, she wandered alone through the villa. The room seemed brighter, cleaner, almost newly built. The faint scent of resin was gone, replaced by salt and rosemary. On the wall of the study, where the painting had once hung, there was only smooth plaster. And yet, when she stood close enough, she could see faint patterns shifting beneath the surface, as though the wall itself were remembering light. She touched it gently. The plaster was warm. I know you're still here, she whispered. All of you. The air trembled faintly. Somewhere far below, the sea answered with a soft wave against stone. When she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a glimmer on the desk where Léonie's last notebook had been. It wasn't there now, but in its place lay a small crystal, the size of a heart. Translucent amber shot through within veins of gold. She picked it up carefully. It was warm, pulsing faintly in her palm. For a moment, she thought she heard a voice, not outside, but inside her chest. Not the sea, not the veil, the blood. Clara smiled through tears. I know. The crystal's glow faded, leaving only warmth behind. She set it on the mantel beside a vase of white flowers and whispered, For you, Léonie. That night, the sky cleared completely. The air smelled of pine and salt, the stars sharp enough to touch. Luca joined her on the terrace, 2 cups of tea steaming between them. You never told me what you saw, he said quietly. When you were gone. She thought for a long time before answering. It was like standing inside a heartbeat. Everything was light and memory. There was no beginning, no end, just understanding. Were they there? He asked. Yes, Léonie, Étienne, all of them. But they weren't trapped. They were part of something alive. He nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket. You dropped this. It was the old brush, Étienne's, the handle cracked, the bristles worn and nothing. He placed it in her hands. She turned it over and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Faint engraving along the side. Words in French, nearly erased by time. Chaque souffle est un souvenir. Every breath is a memory. She closed her eyes. Then the painting's done. Luca smiled. And you? I think I'm still drying. They laughed softly. For a moment, the island felt like a person listening. Later, when Luca had gone inside, Clara remained on the terrace. The moon hung over the sea, round and calm. The water shimmered in bands of pale gold, each wave rolling inward, then out again, steady, balanced. She pressed a hand over her heart and felt the pulse beneath her skin. It matched the tide perfectly. The air around her shimmered once, barely visible, like a mirage. For an instant, she thought she saw a figure standing beside her. Léonie, veil lifted, eyes bright with quiet pride. Thank you, Clara whispered. The vision smiled, then faded into the starlight. Only the sea remained, breathing softly against the shore. The next morning, the amber crystal on the mantel had changed. Inside its heart, a tiny air bubble had formed, motionless, perfect, like a captured breath. When Clara held it up to the sun, the light passed through it and painted the walls in gold. And for a moment, if she listened closely, she could hear faint music, the echo of waves, the whisper of distant voices, the pulse of memories still alive in the air. The veil hadn't vanished. It had simply learned how to live among them. Chapter 20. The Listener. A year later, Villa Ambra no longer slept. The walls still whispered when the wind passed through, and the sea still breathed beneath the cliffs. But it was a different kind of breath now. Quieter, steadier, as though the island had learned to inhale without fear. Clara stood at the edge of the terrace, the morning light soft on her face. Below her, the small research center shimmered in the cove. Whitewashed walls, glass observation domes, and a narrow pier where instruments glittered like wind chimes. The sound they made when the tide shifted was faintly musical, not dissonant anymore, but harmonious. The sign on the gate read, "The Moreau Center for Acoustic Memory." Luca called from the garden below. "We're ready for calibration." She smiled, lifting her notebook. "Coming." The years had left faint freckles across her cheeks and a few lines at the corners of her eyes. She looked human again, not illuminated, not haunted, just alive. Yet sometimes, when she exhaled, the air shimmered faintly around her, like heat above stone. Inside the villa, the rooms had changed. The laboratory Irina had once improvised in the kitchen was now a bright, ordered workspace filled with glass panels, sensors, and suspended orbs that captured the faint hum of the island. In the afternoons, visitors arrived. Young researchers, artists, musicians, drawn by the rumor of a place where sound and memory touched. Some came for science, some for solace. All left changed. On one wall hung a reproduction of Étienne Moreau's unfinished painting, the one they had found in the monastery. The original was too unstable to move, but its echo remained, a golden circle at the center, warm even in shadow. Clara often caught herself standing before it, without realizing, fingertips grazing the air just above the surface. The paint always felt faintly warm. That afternoon, Irina joined her on the terrace. Her hair had gone more silver than gray. Her eyes still carried the brightness of a mind unwilling to rest. "You realize you've turned a legend into a field study," she said, sitting with a sigh. "My students still think I made half of it up." "Maybe you did," Clara said, smiling. "That's how stories survive." Irina tilted her head. "Do you still hear it?" Clara thought for a moment. Not as before. "It doesn't call. It listens." "To what?" "To us." At dusk, Luca joined her by the shore. He carried 2 glasses of wine and the same easy smile that had grown familiar over the months. "To surviving impossible things," he said. They sat on the rocks, feet in the water. The horizon stretched before them in molten gold. The sun dipped, and for a moment the reflection on the sea looked like a single, infinite thread, connecting everything, binding nothing. "Do you ever miss the hum?" he asked. Clara smiled faintly. It never left. It just stopped needing to be heard. He turned to her. "And you?" "I still paint," she said. "Only now I use silence." He laughed softly. "Silence doesn't sell well." "Then maybe it's not for sale." They fell quiet. The waves rolled in and out with perfect symmetry, as though following an invisible rhythm, the same one she carried in her heartbeat. Later, when night fell, she walked alone to the villa. In the study, the amber crystal still rested on the mantel. Under the moonlight, it glowed faintly, the air bubble inside pulsing once every few seconds. Alive, listening, she whispered good night. And for the briefest instant, the room seemed to exhale, a sound too small to be real, too intimate to be imagined. Then silence again, deep and kind. Weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting unfamiliar. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore only one line, written in faded ink. "The veil never ends. It just changes breath." Clara smiled as she folded it carefully and placed it between the pages of Léonie's notebook, which she now kept on her desk. She glanced toward the open window. The breeze carried the scent of resin, just faint enough to make her wonder. Outside, the sea glimmered in the moonlight, calm, infinite, aware. Clara closed her eyes, listening. For a long time, she heard nothing but her own breathing. And then, softly, like the sound of memory finding its way home, came a single whisper from the distance. "Thank you." Chapter 21. The Tides Remember. Morning came on soft feet, curling itself around Villa Ambra with the hush of linen shaken out, and left it warm in the sun. A pale mist clung to the terraces, not the storm-born kind, but the sort that rises from a sea that has slept well. Clara stood on the highest step of the east garden, watching the light sift through the lemon trees. Each leaf held a small bright coin. Each branch ticked in a slow, private metronome. Down in the cove, the new Moreau Center woke with its usual modest industry. Doors opened. Coverings rolled back from the sensor rays. The little pier pressed its shadow cleanly onto the water. From a distance, it looked like a chapel that had decided to become useful. Close up, it sounded like intent disguised as curiosity. Cables knocking gently, a wind-veined mass whispering, laptops booting with their shy chimes. Nothing miraculous, nothing that would frighten anyone who hadn't already met the veil. Today was the first quiet calibration, an experiment conceived with the kind of arrogance only tenderness can excuse. They would record nothing. They would ask nothing. They would sit and listen while the island breathed and agree among themselves not to name it data. Artists and scientists had arrived on the earliest ferry, shoulders slung with cases that held bows and microphones and little boxes of silvered circuitry. A composer from Marseille whose scores looked like diagrams of weather. A field recordist from Dubrovnik who could hear a cricket at a kilometer. A poet who denied the label and therefore was one. 3 students who hadn't learned yet that reverence is a kind of precision. Clara greeted them with tea and the gently bossy kindness that made people forget they were being organized. Luca distributed the schedule with a pencil tucked behind one ear. He looked, as always, positioned exactly at the hinge where practical met the impossible. Irina moved through the room like a weather front, rearranging a tripod, checking the clock against her own pulse, taping a printed reminder near the door. Silence is a measurement, too. They began at 9. No headphones, no tones, only the sea and whatever it remembered. The first hour passed without event, which was the event. Those who had come with expectations were obliged to lower them and discover what else their hands might do besides tighten. A gull wrote something brief and obscene above the pier and was forgiven. Somewhere up the cliff a dog took issue with rumor and fell silent when the rumor failed to repeat itself. The cove held its breath in the way of places that have learned to let someone else set the count. At 10, the wind pivoted. Not a full turn, just a slight shift that rehangs a day on a new nail. The air cooled against skin. A silver became a blue. The surface of the cove flattened by a degree that would not have shown on a photograph, but made everyone look up at once, as if a word had been spoken that meant, simply, now. The poet, who was not, leaned her elbows on a railing, eyes narrowed. Something leaned. She said, "It did." Irina answered, not pretending not to understand. She set a finger lightly to the aluminum rail. Feel tiny pressure change. Clara closed her eyes. The island's rhythm had not accelerated, but it had rephrased itself. Where there had been 3 slow beats and a pause, there was now a longer exhalation, as if a sleeper had rolled onto their side and offered more lung to the room. The composer lifted his notebook and drew a line across the staff. So lightly the pencil left shine instead of lead. "We're modulating." "We are," Luca murmured, and then smiled because it still startled him to say we and have included so much that could not be counted. They heard it before the microphones admitted they did. Not a voice in any ordinary sense. Not the choir Clara had known in the heart of the veil. This was thinner and nearer. A thread of tone that seemed to originate within the water, just beyond the pier, rise to the surface, and drift into the air like steam. It carried vowels without consonants, the way a memory carried weather without dates. No one spoke. They did not have to promise not to. 3 minutes, perhaps 4. Later, in recall, it would be exactly the time it needed to be. When it ceased, no one moved. The poet closed her eyes. The field recordist pressed his palms together in front of his mouth in a gesture that could have been prayer, but was only the startled courtesy of the competent. A student began to cry and then laughed at herself, and then cried again because she had laughed in the wrong place. The sea resumed being water. The air resumed being air. Irina made a small note on her pad, tore the page free, and folded it twice. She did not look at the instruments. "I will not check," she said, and tucked the note into her pocket like a confession that had already found its absolution. They ate bread and tomatoes on the dock steps. Olive oil found the corners of mouths and did not show. Conversation stepped carefully, as if the verbs had slept badly. No one asked if it would happen again. Asking has a grammar that breaks the neck of the thing being asked. After lunch, the students took the kayaks and did not go far. They came back with skins on their hands that smelled of salt and the cold green of submerged weeds. One of them tipped his head toward the mouth of the cove. "Out there," he said, meaning not far, meaning a line in the water where distance turned to listening. Near 5. The change announced itself in the way a room goes quiet before someone important comes in late and tries to be invisible. The wind dropped. Shadows lengthened like agreements. The first little waves of the returning tide hesitated and then kept their appointment with the stones. The recordist lifted his parabolic dish-out habit, then set it down, abashed at the thought of aiming at something that had already offered itself. The composer looked at Clara. "If it repeats, will you?" She shook her head gently. "No, not this time." The second tone rose thinner than the first, then thickened, tying itself to the timber of the pier. It felt, to Clara, older than the one from morning, as if the island had looked back farther in its chest and found something worth showing. Within it she could almost hear edges, the brushed signature of a rope on wood, the echo of footsteps that might have been Léonie's on a day with different weather, the small astonished sound a man makes when he realizes he has painted something he cannot any longer separate from himself. Then something else happened, and even those prepared to be unprepared were unprepared for it. The tide climbed the stairs in the exact pattern of the morning's breath. 3 little tongues of water, a pause hardly longer than the length of a sentence held politely back, then a fourth that did not wet one more step, but stayed and brightened. In that thin layer sunlight broke and recombined. For the space of 5 heartbeats, the water was full of slow fire. It faded without drama. The sea resumed the ordinary task of arriving. A gull landed on the mast and said the title of a novel no one had written yet. Clara exhaled. She had not known she had been holding anything. Luca's hand found the middle of her back. Pressure as light and precise as punctuation. "Thank you," said the not poet to the water, not needing and not receiving an answer. They packed gently. The visiting instruments went back in their foam nests. The local ones were covered with the plain tenderness most people reserve for tired dogs and freshly baked bread. The ferry took the guests away strong with that end-of-day fatigue that feels like accomplishment pretending not to be joy. Their gratitude had the almost embarrassed quality of people who had been given access to a private family ritual and had behaved well enough to be invited again. After they left, the cove turned toward evening with its usual clean economy. A boy from a village threw a line from the far rocks and retrieved it empty with the patient fury of a young. 2 couples walked the path above the cliff with that civilized distance which allows for the possibility of changing sides without calling it betrayal. Somewhere inland a tractor closed its day, coughing twice like a smoker surprised by kindness. Clara remained on the pier after the others climbed toward the villa. The light shifted from gold that tells the truth to gold that flatters. She sat with her feet on the lowest step, shoes beside her like obedient animals, toes in the water, letting the tide read her as if the skin of her ankles held text. The first of the amber came at twilight. Not chunks, not the theatrical pebbles beaches pretend to be generous with after storms. These were the size of fingernail, ovals so thin you could mistake them for insect wings. They moved not on the surface, but within it, rising like thoughts that had been promised a body and were trying it on. When they touched the step, they paused like animals offered a human palm, and then settled with a sound too small to be captured by any device. Clara lifted one between finger and thumb. It weighed barely anything. Inside it, a single air bubble sat perfectly round, not moving. She held it to the light. The bubble was not a bubble, but a small globe of not light where light had chosen to stay out for reasons that could not be argued with. She brought it to her lips without meaning to and felt not a taste, exactly, but a memory of a taste. Pine and salt. A clean room note from decades ago where glass and breath had been taught a language. More pieces arrived. 10, 20, a small shy flock. They did not pile up. Each found its place along the step, as if the step had been remembering them all day and was relieved to pronounce their names. Luca's footsteps sounded on the path behind her. He did not ask. He lowered himself to sit, close enough that their shoulders knew, but did not flaunt that they were touching. "What are they?" he asked finally, because naming is its own species of love. "Fossils of breath," she said, "or little notes the sea wrote to itself and forgot to mail." He laughed softly. "Of course." They gathered them with the care one gives to small sleeping animals. A shallow wooden tray from the lab. A square of lint-free cloth. Each piece lifted and laid down without comment, because comment would have made the act ridiculous, and the act was precise enough to refuse ridicule. When the last had found its place, Luca carried the tray up the path with the enviable competence of a good thief. Irina met them at the lab door with tweezers she did not use and a magnifier she forgot to raise. She made a sound she would later deny. The pieces lay on white paper, like punctuation marks, excited to be at the end of a complicated sentence. They stayed late. The room grew blue and then stopped having color. The tray took on the authority of relics without any of the clutter. No one reached for a camera. Sometimes documentation is an apology, and no one in the room had anything they wanted to apologize for. At last Irina touched Clara's wrist. "Go sleep," she said, tone professional but warm by surrender. "I will put them to bed." "Don't measure them," Clara said, and then laughed because she had made a joke out of command. "I won't," Irina said, and meant it more than she knew. On the terrace, the first real stars since the quiet calibration took their places with a bored excellence of performers that have done the run 1,000 nights and still find a reason. The villa inhaled the evening. Old stone, rosemary, a hint of lemons the night was saving for a more explicit summer. Somewhere a television in the village learned English badly and was applauded for trying. The world behaved itself. Clara remained a while with her elbows on the rail. She set one of the thin ambers against the moon and watched the bubble cut the light into a ring. The words arrived before she could decide to think them. Maybe remembering is just another way of loving. She did not say it aloud. Some thoughts know their best voice. When she finally turned toward the bedroom, she paused at the study door. The wall where the old painting had been was still only wall, polite and convincingly ordinary. She pressed her palm to it anyway. It was warm, the way a page is warm after someone has just lifted their hand from it. "Sleep," she said to the house, to the sea, to the part of herself that had not yet learned that the work could be done and still need doing. "I will listen in the morning." Behind her, down in the cove, the tide laid its careful weight across the lowest step, and then another, not to claim but to remember. Above her, a small night wind sorted the leaves into their proper registers. The island did not speak. It did not have to. The count held, even in the dark. Nothing urgent waited inside the next breath. It would arrive when it was ready, like weather, like forgiveness. Chapter 22. The map beneath the skin. The reel-to-reel machine looked like a small, polite animal that had learned to sit very still. Irina set it on the long table of the study with the reverence due to devices that have carried voices farther than their inventors imagined. The metal caught the afternoon light. The reels were amber-tinted, as if they had swallowed years, and found them sweet. "We found it in a shipping crate from Marseille," Irina said, smoothing a strip of tape between careful fingers. "No custom stamp. No catalog card. Just this." She held up a slip of paper, thin onion skin, typed. Institute Moreau, Session Voix/LM. A date in the corner. November 6, 1955. Clara sat forward, elbows on her knees, hands folded as if in prayer only because she needed somewhere to put them. Luca leaned against the window jamb, arms crossed in the posture of a man who would not admit he was bracing the room. Irina pressed a switch. The motor hummed. The reels began their orbit. A scuff of room tone, a chair leg on tile, the chastened cough of a microphone finding its job. Then a voice, female, mid-20s or older with the sort of youth that has learned not to show off. French with the coast in it. Test of resonance, Sal spiral. Sujet L11, Emile 2 intense. Another voice, softer, not near the mic. G T intends, Léonie. Clara closed her eyes. The page she had been writing on in her mind went blank in a way that felt like a door opening. J vase respiro rhythm, Léonie said. Si J disparais and ecris nam. A laugh, male and too tender to be professional. Alorte and necarai rain du tout. The room on the tape changed the way a room changes when it realizes it is being used for something more honest than conversation. A low tone rose from nowhere and everywhere. Not the island's 84-second count, but a city-made cousin closer in, like breath caught behind the teeth. Léonie inhaled. The sound joined her. When she exhaled, the tone thinned, fluttered, returned, as if it had learned and then forgot, and then remembered the lesson within a single thought. Luca looked at Clara. The look said nothing either of them could afford to say aloud. Encore, Emile murmured. The reels turned. The room tone became water without water, reverberation shaped into something like mercy. Then the voice that was not Léonie. Étienne la ligne n'est pas droite. Elle est en spiral. Static swallowed the end of the sentence. When it cleared, a new voice entered the room, bright, breathless, more air than consonant. Étienne, younger than the man in the monastery's vision, and already standing too near the edge of his own belief. Léonie regard. Saiji pains peninque to respires. Locular echoed. A brush clinked glass. Cloth lifted from a jar. The microphone caught a small gasp, the sound a person makes when pigment, and not the painter, chooses a line. Ce n'est pas de el while, Étienne whispered. C'est de la mémoire. Clara pressed her thumb hard into her palm until a clean pain gave her something to hold that was not a ghost. She saw the spiral room in her head. Walls tuned to particular frequencies, notes etched into plaster, the young man painting as if it could outrun a sea he had not yet met. Léonie stood inside the sound and gave it permission to be a body. Irina reached to adjust the volume. Her hand paused in the air. On the tape, Léonie spoke again, not to either man and not to the room, but to a future she could not have believed would play her back. A ce que coudre après moi. Et n'ayez pas peur de si que est souvient. Le souffle n'est pas impede, say on port. The reel slowed. A click. The weary grace of a machine that has carried its message as far as it knows how. Silence in the study, the kind that arrives not to empty a room, but to fill it. Clara did not move. The words that set their weight in her chest were the island used to keep its hand. She opened her eyes to find Luca watching her with a patience he had borrowed from rocks. Irina, who did not believe in miracles unless handed data to house them, sat with tears on her cheekbones like lenses that had chosen to magnify nothing but need. It was never just the island, Clara said. It was them, before they would see enough to learn our names. Irina wiped her face with scientist efficiency. There's more, she said, almost apologetic. I found something else. Not on the tape. She reached for a flat box, archival gray, corners reinforced with linen tape. Inside, beneath tissue that had yellowed in obedience to time, lay a roll of translucent paper. She unrolled it gently across the table. Technical drawing, annotated in French, and a drafter's quick hand. Plan, Sal spiral. Institute Moreau. Around the clean geometry. Smaller notations. Heart rate. Interval lengths. Pigment ratios. In one margin, a tiny figure of a hand. Over the index finger, a line tracer. Clara laid her palm over the sketch. The length of her middle finger matched the drafter's margin markings exactly. It meant nothing, and it meant everything. He designed the room around a body, she said, not a theory. 2 bodies, Irina corrected, tapping the paired arcs. Painter and bearer. Étienne and Léonie. The spiral meets where they breathe. Luca shifted, slow. It worked, and it broke them. Clara thought of the monastery. Pigment that wanted to be a person, water that wanted to be language. She rolled the plan back into itself with a tenderness that surprised her and did not. "Come," she said. "There's something I need to see outside." They crossed the terrace into a light that had decided to be generous. The sea below wore its late afternoon like a shawl of beaten silver. In the garden, the lemon trees offered themselves without bargaining. Clara chose a patch of shade where the stone kept a memory of night. "Irina, the UV lamp?" she asked. Irina frowned and understood. She returned with the portable lamp they used for varnish checks and insect surveys. "You think?" "I don't know what I think," Clara said and extended her hands. The lamp's violet spilled across skin. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then the thin, opalescent lines that had slept under Clara's surface since the night of the cliff brightened. Not gold now, not heat. A cool luminosity rose like phosphorescence under tide. The lines did not follow veins. They followed intention. Luca leaned in, breath carefully ordinary. Good God! Beneath her skin a pattern resolved. Concentric arcs crossing precise intervals. A spiral that was not a spiral so much as a promise to return. Tiny sigils sat at nodes. The same marks Étienne had inscribed into plaster and paint. Over the base of her thumb, a small figure 8, the lung sigil, the infinity of breath. Across the heel of her hand, a line of microletters too fine to read. Irina steadied the lamp. "Hold it there." Clara turned her wrist. The letters shifted into legibility at the angle where bone and light agreed to show their secret. French, yes, but written like a notation meant to survive translation. Chaque souffle lays uncart. Every breath leaves a map. She laughed, quiet, incredulous, not afraid. "He wasn't engraving the world," she said. "He was teaching our bodies to remember it." They tested both hands, the inside of her forearms, the soft skin along her collarbone where a necklace would fall. Lines answered everywhere, not invasive but invitational. A geography offered rather than imposed. "What happens if I trace it?" she asked. And before either could object, she fetched a stick of willow charcoal from the studio and knelt on the terrace stone. UV darkened stone to an almost night. Charcoal set stars in it. She copied her own interior map as faithfully as a hand had ever been asked to behave. The spiral took the space it needed, and exactly that. At its center she left a small, deliberate gap, not absence. "Welcome." She clicked off the lamp. The lines on her skin faded to a memory of light. The charcoal sketch held. Luca stepped back to see it whole. He had the look of a man who knew the instant when a hypothesis became a shore. "It's the Institute's plan," he said, "but also the island's caves. And also," Irina added, "your pulse." Clara stood and felt under her feet the household tremor of a place learning that its bones, too, could be loosely held. A door somewhere settled its mind. The air under the lemon leaves scented itself, as if deciding to be generous cost nothing. In the evening, they carried the reels and the plan back to the study. They ate standing up, olives and anchovies and bread stolen without apology from the next morning. No one said the word sacred, and yet nothing profane could have crossed the room even if invited. After midnight, when the villa had taken on the calm of a creature asleep without fear, Clara lay on the sofa, with Léonie's notebook open on her chest. The tape's voices rode the low current of the house in remembered waves. Something like drowsiness reached for her. She did not take it. The pages asked to be read again. Between two entries, a recipe for resin mixture, a sketch of the Marseille spiral. She found a note in a hand not Léonie's and not Emile's. The same slightly careless loop she had learned now to know as Étienne's. Si tu lis ceci, tu as déjà la carte. Elle n'est pas sur papier. Elle est sous ta peau. N'essaie pas de la posséder. Prit la mon quan il oublie comment respirer. If you are reading this, you already have the map. It is not on paper. It is beneath your skin. Do not try to own it. Lend it to the world when it forgets how to breathe. Clara closed the book. The kind of weary joy that does not care if it looks like grief found a comfortable chair in her throat and sat. She rested her fingers against her wrist. The pulse answered like a well-raised child, present, unshowy, proud enough to be quiet. She stood and went to the terrace. The night sea was not black, but a depthless blue, that painters lie about and are forgiven for. The charcoal spiral on the stone held its ground. A moth visited and departed, as if it had been invited to proofread. Luca joined her wordlessly, a blanket folded over one arm. He set around her shoulders without presumption, the way people cover sleeping children and lovers who may or may not be pretending to sleep. He followed her gaze to the drawing, then out to the place where horizon pretends to be true. "What is it?" he asked, not meaning the drawing. "A way through," she said. "Not a door, a direction." "And where does it go?" She smiled. The answer rose without effort, a tide returning with nothing to prove. Everywhere the breath might be needed. They stood there until the first gull rewrote the margin between night and day. The lemon leaves gathered dew and let it go. Down in the cove, a gentle lift, the smallest of swells, touched the pier as if to say, "I know where you keep your secrets. I will not tell." The charcoal lines held their dark. The map beneath her skin kept its light, without asking to be seen. Somewhere inside the villa, the tape machine ticked the last clicks of its cooling metal. It had done its work. The voices it had carried now lived in other rooms. The soft one where memory volunteers to become language. The louder one where language agrees to borrow someone else's breath instead of inventing its own. Clara drew a small circle with her toe at the center gap of the spiral and did not fill it. She had learned what space was for. "The map was never drawn on paper," she said, not loudly and not for effect. "It was drawn beneath the skin." She felt Luca nod without looking. The sea looked back at them the way a beloved does when both of you have finally put down the need to be right. Behind them, the house breathed once, a comfortable, ordinary inhalation of walls, and wood, and whatever stories choose to leave their coats in the hall and stay. The island did not answer. It did not need to. The direction existed now, even when eyes were closed. The night made room for morning with a courtesy that felt earned. Chapter 23. The Last Resonance. The sea was quieter now, but it was not still. It listened. Clara stood before the great window of the Moreau Center's new observatory, her reflection hovering over the water like a second horizon. Around her, the room hummed with the low, rhythmic sound of machines idling in expectation. Screens blinked, charts rolled slowly upward, but all of it seemed to orbit the silence she carried. Irina adjusted the dial, frowned, then smiled without surprise. "It's ready," she said. "Your sequence is calibrated to the world network. Once we start, it will transmit through every open frequency, marine stations, satellites, even the listening buoys in the Arctic." Luca stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "You're certain this won't wake it again?" Clara turned toward him. "It's not about waking or sleeping anymore. It's about balance." Her voice was steady, but beneath it there was something else, a softness like the hush between waves. She wore no lab coat, no jewelry, only a linen dress that moved when the air did. On her wrist, the faint spiral pattern glowed when the light touched it, a quiet signature of what she had carried to the veil and back. "The transmission isn't a command," she said. "It's an offering." They began at sunset. The devices aligned their quiet pulses, sending thin lines of sound through the sea. The tone was so low it could have been mistaken for the murmur of a tide inside a dream. Clara stood in the center of the room, eyes closed, as Irina initiated the sequence. The sound filled the observatory, not loud but immense, like the hum of distance folding in on itself. The moment it reached full amplitude, something in the world responded. Across the monitors, data shifted. The readings from the Mediterranean, the Aegean, the North Atlantic, all began to pulse in time. Small, imperceptible harmonics linked them, forming a rhythm that spread outward faster than any tide. Clara could see it on the global map, a slow ripple radiating from Lyra Island, touching coastlines like fingertips. In Tunisia, a scientist looked up from her sonar array and heard music in the static. In Santorini, a diver felt the water tremble against his ribs. In Marseille, a painter stopped mid-stroke, brush dripping gold. In Reykjavik, a child woke crying and said, "Someone is breathing the sky." The wave of sound was not destructive. It passed through cities and forests and oceans, leaving nothing behind except quiet. And in that quiet, The world seemed to remember itself. Hours passed before the tone subsided. When it did, the observatory lights dimmed automatically, as if bowing to something larger than electricity. The instruments fell silent. The screens went black. Only the sea remained, lit faintly by the moon. Luca exhaled. It's done. Clara nodded, but she didn't move. Her eyes were still on the horizon. Listen, she whispered. At first, they heard nothing. Then, a faint echo, returning not through the speakers but through the air itself. A sequence of low, harmonic breaths. Each one perfectly matched the rhythm of her pulse. Irina whispered, "It's answering you." Clara smiled faintly. "No, it's remembering me." Later that night, she returned to the villa alone. The corridors glowed with the soft warmth of candlelight. The walls breathed with their familiar hush. On the desk in her study lay the amber crystal. Inside it, the tiny air bubble she'd noticed months before had changed shape. It was now a perfect spiral, like the one beneath her skin. She held it up to the window. The moonlight passed through, painting the walls with liquid gold that moved like water. And within that light, for a moment, she saw them. Étienne, Léonie, and the countless others who had become part of the choir. They were not ghosts. They were resonance, memory made kind. Every breath you give back to the world becomes light somewhere else. Léonie's voice said. Clara whispered, "Then the world will never go dark again." She set the crystal on the windowsill, where it caught the first hints of dawn. By morning, news had reached them from across the world. Whales were surfacing in harbors where they had not been seen in decades. Musicians in Cairo and Naples reported instruments vibrating in the same key. In Venice, the bells rang slightly off time, not out of dissonance, but in a pattern that matched the sea's pulse. No one could explain it. No one needed to. At the Moreau Center, journalists came and went, asking their questions, taking their photographs. Clara answered politely, never mentioning the veil or the voices. She spoke instead of harmony, empathy, the ecology of memory. Luca joked that she had become fluent in mystery. Irina, listening from the next room, said quietly, "No, she's just telling the truth at a frequency we can survive." That evening, Clara walked alone to the pier. The tide was low, the air thick with salt. She carried Étienne's old brush in one hand, the bristles now brittle with age. When she reached the end of the dock, she broke it gently in two and let the halves fall into the water. They floated apart, then drifted back together, crossing once before disappearing beneath the surface. She whispered, "Thank you." The sea answered with a small wave, gentle as a nod. She looked out at the horizon. The world felt vast again, not empty, but waiting. The veil was gone, and yet everywhere she looked, she could see its breath. In the shimmer of moonlight on the water, in the pulse under her skin, in the air that seemed to hum softly whenever she closed her eyes. She understood then what Étienne had meant. A canvas never ends. It only changes hands. At midnight, she returned to the terrace. The island slept. The stars were bright enough to reveal the faintest detail of the cliffs below. She drew her shawl closer and pressed a hand to her heart. The rhythm, there was not hers alone anymore. It belonged to everything that had ever learned to listen. "The veil didn't end," she whispered. "It just learned to sing in silence." The sea shimmered once in reply, and for the first time in her life, Clara knew what it meant to breathe without memory and still remember everything. Epilogue. The Letter of Light. Villa Ambra, September 7th. For years after the resonance. To whoever listens next. I no longer know if I'm writing this for myself or for the sea. Perhaps the difference doesn't matter anymore. The world breathes differently now, softer, slower, aware of its lungs. Sometimes, when the wind crosses the terrace, the lemons tremble in perfect rhythm with the tide. I like to think that means the island remembers we kept our promise. The Moreau Center has grown. New rooms, new minds, new languages. Students come from places whose names I once only knew from maps: Seoul, Marrakesh, Valparaiso, each bringing a sound I didn't know the world could make. They study the way silence changes shape inside a body, or how a word can echo long enough to alter a current. I tell them that science is just listening with the discipline of love. At night, when they've all gone to bed, I walk down the cove. The steps still remember my feet. The water still glows faintly where it touches the stones. I think the island exhales a little slower now, content in its age. And yet sometimes when the stars tilt low and the air turns the color of pewter, I hear the old tone, quiet, patient, kind. It doesn't call anymore. It waits. I answer the way one answers a child in another room. I'm here. People often ask if I believe the veil was real. I tell them this. Anything that teaches you how to listen is real enough. I keep the amber crystal on my desk. It's dull now, the light gone from it, but if you hold it to your ear, you can still hear the faint hum of the world thinking. I suppose that's all memory really is, the universe remembering the sound of its own beginning. If you ever find yourself here, on this island that never quite learned how to forget, stand by the sea at dawn and breathe with it. Don't count. Don't analyze. Just breathe. That's the only way to hear the music beneath everything. The same song that built stars, painted tides, and left us here to finish the echo. If you listen closely, you'll understand. Because the veil was never about separation. It was about return. And the last resonance isn't sound at all. It's light, with quiet affection. Clara Moreau, Villa Ambra, Lyra Island. And this was Whispers of the Amber Veil. If you enjoyed this audiobook, don't forget to subscribe to the Inktail channel and share the story with someone who loves dark mysteries and unforgettable worlds. The journey continues on the Inktail channel.